That same logic that explains the paranormal explains quantum physics, relativity, and a whole bunch of other scientific and philosophical issues.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we will be exploring the paranormal in terms of Tom Campbell's theory as expressed in his books My Big Toe. Toe meaning theory of everything. Tom is the author of 3 volumes of that book. He is also the creator of the Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness, which is engaged in both theoretical and paranormal research. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm pleased to be here.
And I'm very happy to be with you once again in my studio in Albuquerque, taking advantage of your brief sojourn in our city. In our first interview, we talked about how the paranormal, and in particular your encounter with Robert Monroe and his work of Journeys Out of the Body, really set you on a path to understand how you can explain these experiences you were having.
That's true. I was the physicist of the group, and physicists are supposed to understand how reality works. So that job fell to me to try to understand, come up with a theory, with an understanding of what was happening, why it was the way it was. And my cohort, my friend in this business, was Dennis Menerick, and he was an electrical engineer. And he put together some of the equipment and helped with, the wiring of things and wiring up of people and making a lab, an honest-to-goodness laboratory with equipment. So between the two of us, we put in many hours with Bob Monroe, like 15 to 20 hours a week for probably 6 or 7 years. So that's a lot of hours. And very quickly, the absolutely astounding and absolutely impossible happened every day. And when that happens every day, it becomes just another day at the lab. So we were no longer able to be astounded by the things that happened. And both of us approached that experience with, well, if this turns out to be something other than, true research, then we're out of here. But if it's real, wow, I'd like to be a part of that understanding. So for my part, I read a lot of things like Seth Speaks. I read some Eastern philosophy, Tibetan Buddhism, just random books that I could get my hands on to read. And some of the old books, Fox, Muldoon, and Carrington, some of the old out-of-body astral projection, as they called it, And mainly I found none of that really was very scientific. It was all anecdotal. I didn't doubt that the things actually happened. It's not that I thought that, the people writing the books were making it up or the people who were going out of body were making it up. It was clear to me from being with Bob that it was a real phenomena, a real experience, but exactly what it was and how it worked and what were the limitations, those did not, those questions were not answered at all. Seth Speaks kind of got closest to it just by saying, this is a multidimensional reality, that sort of thing. And okay, that made sense, but that was very broad kind of hand-waving. That didn't actually get to the details of how did it work. What was the logic behind it? Because it did have logic. These weren't random things. They were things that, some people could do and could repeat. And I could do. Yeah, these were not random events. They were structured. It mattered how you went about them. It mattered the frame of the mind that you had. It mattered what you had to eat. Before you lay down in the lab, a lot of things mattered, a lot of variables. So it was a matter of trying to pick through the variables and find out which variables did what and why. And that took a long time. There's a lot of research was put into that over about a 35-year period before I finally got to the point that I thought I understood it. And then I tried to explain it to someone and found out that I didn't understand it as well as I thought. There were holes in my explanation, things I couldn't explain very well. I knew many times that they were true, but I really couldn't explain why they were true. So as I was writing my books, I was still trying to settle some of those things about the paranormal and how they worked and why they worked that way. But by then I had 30, almost 40 years of experience of getting around in the consciousness system or in the non-physical or in the other dimension or whatever you'd like to call it. I had a lot of experience with it. So I knew certain things about it. Certain things I knew were true, but I didn't really know why that was true. What was the source? What was making this work? And eventually, with enough exploration, enough research, it finally gelled in my mind with the understanding of information is at the core. Everything we hear, see, smell, feel, touch is all information, and that consciousness is about information. All the things you see, hear, smell, and touch when you're out of body is also information. It's just information within a different reality frame. So with that, I realized that this was a science. It wasn't just experiential. Lots of people have had these experiences, but there is a science behind those experiences of why they work that way.
So you started out, really, your goal was to explain the paranormal experiences that you and others were having, starting with your encounter with Robert Monroe, but you came up with a theory that could account for many, if not all, the fundamental mysteries of science.
Yes, I did, and that surprised me tremendously. I didn't really anticipate going there. I didn't start out saying, I'm going to create a theory of everything. That was the farthest thing from my mind. I started out saying, I got to write some of this stuff down to add clarity to my thinking. And I wrote it down, and then I wrote it down, and I passed it out to people and said, what do you think about this? Is it clear? Can you understand it? And mostly it was not clear, and they did not understand it, but they told me why and what their problem was, so I'd add to it, and I'd send back out, and I'd add more to it, and this went on for about 5 years, passing it around, finding out where people got tripped up, what they didn't understand, and then I'd have to get that understanding clear in a way that I could express it to people who had not ever experienced these things and that they would understand it. And that was probably the bigger challenge. Finally figured out how it all worked. Wasn't as big a challenge as trying to figure out how to tell other people how it worked in a way that they could understand it. So yes, that is kind of the way it worked. It didn't start as a theory of everything, and it actually started as, maybe I'll even get a book out of this. And then it's, no, I got way more material than a book. I started parsing it and organizing it, and I said, there's 3 books in here. Mm-hmm. I published them kind of as a theory of consciousness and a theory of everything. But I didn't at all feel like this was the theory. I'm a scientist, and I have to go a long way before I get to the theory. I thought it was a theory. It was a way of constructing reality such that it explained everything I knew about that was normal. I'm a physicist. I know a lot about, physics, and also everything that I knew about the paranormal and just consciousness in general, not just the paranormal, but about consciousness. So I did that, and like most people, I continued learning. I mean, learning is a life's journey. It's not something you do and then you're done. Yeah. So after the books were published, probably 2 or 3 years after the books were published, I was talking with Ted Ballers, who was also, he had a PhD in engineering, and he was running my, where people came to talk, the discussion board. And he said something to me, and it just triggered an understanding of quantum physics. And I got, oh, that's how that works. And I got excited, and I worked on it for about a week. And sure enough, I could explain why quantum physics was the way it was, why probability was the basis, what that, a particle is created by the wave function, a measurement, and the wave function turns into a particle. And I finally got all that, and I said, well, I understand where they're coming with that. That's not the way it works, but it's a good metaphor for the way it seems to work. And then I said, well, if I got that, what about relativity? So I thought about that, and then that came to me just in a few days. And then I started working on all the other paradoxes within science and within physics. And all of those fell out just as well. Then I started working on the problems in philosophy. And then theology, and then biology, and some sociology. You kind of work through these. What are the paradoxes? What is it that just stumps the scientists, and they know that this is so, but they just don't know how that worked or how it's so. So I worked on all of those, and it turned out I could explain all of them, and that surprised me immensely. So I then started finding what couldn't it explain. And I started looking for things that couldn't explain. And I shared this with the people who had come and kind of become followers of mine. And I said, come up with things that it doesn't explain. Where does it fall down? And after some 5 or 10 years of working that vein, it turned out that it explained everything. There wasn't anything that I couldn't explain. That was fundamental. It doesn't explain things that are derived, because it's just the logic of the derivation, but it explains things that were fundamental. So then, just a year ago, 2024, I decided to change, in my mind, it being a theory of everything to the theory of everything, because you couldn't possibly get that much right with a very simple, elegant idea. A wild and crazy idea, no doubt, but it was simple, straightforward, and it got so much right that I couldn't help but thinking, well, it couldn't be very far off the mark. It could be far off the mark. There's no doubt going to be new additions to that theory, or maybe some deletions of old parts of it. It's going to be adjusted. That always happens. You should never get to the point that you think you know everything that there is to know about anything. It's going to grow and change, but
well, to the extent that it's a scientific theory, it inevitably would have to, wouldn't it?
Yes, it's a scientific theory, so it has to be open to new knowledge, and this is. So I just present it as a model of reality. Model and theory mean about the same thing in physics.
I think of it as a meta-theory because it has scientific elements, but it also has metaphysics.
Yeah, well, it explains metaphysics. It answers those metaphysical, questions. It answers the big questions like, what is our purpose? Why are we here? Where did we come from? How are we related to, the source? There is a source. It's not just a random event that just happened. There's planning, there's intelligence in this source. And all of those things were alluded to, but basically unknown exactly what the structure was and how they worked. And kind of a funny thing that happened to me is, as a young scientist, I kind of laughed at religion and thought it was the weak minds who were fearful, finding a solace in a story that felt good. So I kind of wrote that off, and I also, as we talked about, thought that most of religion and ideas of God and so on were all invented by people. They were all particularly the Old Testament kind of angry and jealous God. I said that was probably created by a lot of angry and jealous people. But anyhow, so I was very much amused when I discovered that all the very fundamentals of my theory were actually verifications that what most of the major religions of the world had been talking about all along. And I just had to laugh at myself about that. Finally, I do all this work, I come to all of these conclusions, and I end up at the same place that many people, at least the spiritual component of religions, have already gotten to.
Well, earlier you said we live in a world, if I can paraphrase, based on information.
Yes.
So, for example, this bronze sculpture here, which I met the artist at one time, he was sitting right in that chair. He created it. It's heavy, probably weighs 20, 25 pounds. What you're saying is it's really composed of information.
It is, indeed. Well, the way that makes sense is you have to think of a virtual reality game. And most people that are younger than us have probably played these virtual reality games. And there, things are very physical. The characters, if you're a Sims character, well, you open the door. You can't walk through the door of your house. You have to open it with a doorknob. You go inside, you open the refrigerator, you get yourself something to drink. When you put the glass on the table, it goes clink. When it hits the table, you close the refrigerator door. It makes a noise, thud. It's very physical. There's rules that you have to abide by, and those are the rules that define what Sims characters can and cannot do.
Of course, if I'm playing a game like that, I know it's a game. But people here, for the most part, think that this is reality, not a game.
They do. And if you think from the perspective of the avatar in your game, he thinks it's the real thing too. That his world is full of solid objects that are heavy. He can't pick up. He drives a car. If you're a Sims, you get in a car and you drive it. You can't pick that car up. It's too heavy. He has a lot of the same constraints that we do because it was modeled on our reality. So there are these constraints, these rules built into it. And yes, there are objects, and yes, they're heavy. And if a Sims character had that statue made out of bronze and picked it up and dropped it, it would make a big crash on the floor, probably leave a dent, and very physical. Now that's from the avatar's perspective. But from the player's perspective, it's very different. From the player's perspective, these are just computed characters. And the player makes all their choices. Whether that character goes to the refrigerator, gets in the car, or lies down and goes to sleep, that's the choice of the player. So the player sees it from a totally different perspective than the avatar. So I would assert that you and I, our bodies, we're avatars, and that we each have a player. That player is what we call our consciousness.
So my body, flesh and blood, if I cut it, it bleeds, and I feel pain.
Yes.
You're saying it's really just computed.
Yes, that's just computed. And that blood is not computed at all until you cut your finger, because it's not what anybody sees. And if nobody sees it, no measurement is taken, then there's no point in computing it. So there also is no brain. You're thinking, well, here we're sitting and we're talking, and when there's no brain, no, there's no brain unless one of us's heads fall apart, and then there's a brain showing, then there's a brain. So all of the functions of what we think of the brain, we think the brain creates consciousness. We think the brain is the center of all of our thinking. Consciousness, the larger consciousness system, with part of its system being configured as a computer, computes this virtual reality. Part of this system is us, pieces of consciousness, individuated units of consciousness, and they're the players. And the game is there because consciousness evolves by making choices, low entropy choices. And it needs a virtual reality to define these choices, to define possibilities of experience. So in our virtual reality, there's lots of choices, lots of experiences. We have lots of things that we can do. And we can do things out of caring and love and consideration. We can do things out of selfishness and greed and negativity. We have the choices to do it either way. But this virtual reality evolves toward becoming love. And we're here to make good choices. An interesting thing there is this concept defines right and wrong, good and bad. So it turns out to be what we call a moral code. Mm-hmm. It defines those things. You want to know what's good? Well, what does it do to the entropy of the system? If it raises it, it's bad. If it lowers it, it's good. And you don't always know how that comes out because you do something that affects others. And those others affect others. And so on. So it doesn't actually come to the point that you know what the total entropy to the system is going to be. So you do the best you can. You try to be positive, do your due diligence about thinking about the correctness of what you're doing. Then you just go ahead and do it and learn from it. So that's why we're here. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's why this piece of art is heavy and feels very solid to us, because in this virtual reality, it's exactly like that. That's the rule set.
Well, given this rule set, it's not like I can make it levitate. I don't seem to have that ability.
No, you don't. Neither does your Sims character. That's not part of the rule set. Uh-huh. If that were part of the rule set, then you'd be able to do that. The rules basically define what the avatar can and cannot do. So just because this is a virtual reality doesn't mean that the rules will allow you to levitate that. Now, it's possible that sometimes we can break the rules. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can do things that are not supported by the rule set. But we do those only after much learning and effort on our part to develop our intuitive side rather than our intellectual side, and then only in specific situations. We can't just do that anytime we want. We have to do that in a setting in which it is plausibly deniable by the larger population.
Well, sometimes the larger population goes to great lengths to try and deny some of these things.
Absolutely.
I think implausibly.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I don't think I mentioned this to you before, but I sponsored Uri Geller's first major public appearance in the United States in 1972, the University of California, Berkeley. At Zellerbach Auditorium, 1,800 people filled the auditorium, and he demonstrated his ability to bend small metal objects, for which he became quite famous over the years. And other people would learn about that he was doing this. For example, I had him on my radio show, and all of a sudden we're getting phone calls from the listeners, people who are saying, "Oh something just happened in my house while I was listening to your program. The clock that didn't work for the last 12 years started running," or "My silverware is bending right in front of me in my house." So those are clearly paranormal events. Mainstream culture simply says, "Oh, it didn't really happen. These people are deluded in some fashion or other." And I don't know that it made a big impact on our culture overall. It seems to have come and gone as a fad of some sort. So how do you account for that in your theory?
There's this principle called the Psi uncertainty principle. Mm-hmm. And what that says is that it's important to keep the understanding of Psi and what it does and how to work with it. It's important to keep that within the community of people who can deal with it positively. And where that has not happened, where that is widely known, are, for example, all around coastal Africa. It's widely understood that the mind can change things. That I'll just make a name, the quote, witch doctor can hurt you or help you based on his intent and his knowledge of magic and whatever else we say. So that's known. And in these places, there are people who will not hurt you for a price.
That happens here in the United States as well.
Al Capone was good at that game, right? I won't burn your store down if you give me some protection money. So, yes, but there are people who just use their intents, their knowledge of what we would call black arts, to hurt people. I will make your child sick. I can make your child die, even, if you don't give me money. And you will find, if you talk to people from those cultures, even though they're well educated, even though they have their PhDs in biochemistry and other things, I just say that because I knew one such person with a PhD in biochemistry, they know that that's real. They know that these are not just idle threats. They know that there's a force there that can be applied, and they respect it and fear it, very much. So that's something to be avoided. You don't want just every person, particularly people of very low quality of consciousness, to understand that there are ways to go around the rule set. So let's say I'm a really good practitioner of the paranormal, and I can levitate a box of rocks. And I have my friends over, and when there's 2 or 3 friends, I levitate the box of rocks, and it goes up and it comes down. And they can weigh it, and it weighs 50 pounds, and it goes up and down, and it floats around the room, and I can do all that. So somebody says, well, let's publish that. I mean, that's really great. That's amazing. So they call all the network news and say, come to this guy's house, and we're going to watch him levitate a box of rocks. So NBC, CBS, MNSBC, they're all there. They all have their camera going, and guess what? The box of rocks sits on the table and never moves, because now you're in a situation that violates the psi uncertainty principle. The psi uncertainty principle says you can do psi things that violate the rule set or seemingly violate the rule set, but you have to do it in such a way that it doesn't damage the larger society, in such a way that you don't create more fear, more negativity, like you have in coastal Africa, and that's East Coast and West Coast of Africa. They tend to be that way.
Well, it's not all negative.
No, well, it's not that it's negative. It's not that the breaking the rules is negative. Breaking the rules is just something that can be done. But if people used it, if people were able to, you can bond to somebody's consciousness, and you can talk to them. You can communicate conscious to consciousness. You can plant ideas in their mind. So what if all the people who worked for you all were planting ideas in your mind? You need to promote me. I'm the one that you should be promoted. Look at all the chaos that would be going on, and everybody trying to manipulate everybody else. And you'd have a culture that would then become fearful of that manipulation, have to ward against it. And all that creates dysfunction, all creates high entropy. So the system says if you're going to do paranormal, do it within a setting that is informative, that's useful, like at the Reincarnation Institute. Do it someplace that it's not scary, and then it's okay. You can do it. But the general public will not believe you. And that's, right now, designed in. So as we grow up, as our population has a higher quality of consciousness, that psi uncertainty principle will be relaxed. More people will be able to use that intent and do so even in a public place.
What you're saying is the psi uncertainty principle is built right into the rules.
Yes, built right into the rules, but it's more of a it's not so much a rule as it is a policy.
A policy.
It can be changed. The rules generally don't change. That's physics, chemistry, biology. That's science. But policies can change. Right now, that principle is required so that we don't degenerate into more and more fear in this culture, because that's de-evolutionary, not evolutionary.
You use the term the larger consciousness system. That would be where the policy is created.
Yes.
But I gather at this point, and maybe you can help clarify, that the larger consciousness system is, at this point, a community. It's not a single consciousness.
That's right. It's a community. It has its leader. It has the kind of the original consciousness, if you will, that then broke off pieces of itself to make other, what I call individuated units of consciousness. But altogether, the system is all of that. So you can think of the original consciousness, kind of the bigger, larger consciousness, rather than the pieces that it created, as being the originator. You can think of it as being the operating system, if you will.
But you also indicate we are part of that.
Yes, we're a part of it.
Of the operating system.
Yeah, we're just a piece of it.
So that policy, we had some role in establishing that policy.
No, not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
We are here to have experience, and through that experience, evolve. Mm-hmm. That's our job. That's what we were created for. The larger consciousness system is part of us, the system, but it is, what can we say, led by, it is, was created by this consciousness that is still kind of in charge, in a sense. It sets the rules, created the virtual reality, creates the part of itself that serves as a server or a computer for that. And the point, I think, here that's missing is that the larger consciousness system evolves as we evolve. It evolves on its own, but it also evolves as we evolve because we're a part of it. And it created this virtual reality for us to evolve the quality of our consciousness. So it's motivated for us to succeed. In its motivation for us to succeed, it tries to be helpful. It tries to give you the things you need to grow, give you opportunities, sometimes give you fear tests to see what opportunities would be appropriate and what opportunities would not be appropriate. It would set a policy of not creating a lot more fear in the land because that would be counterproductive. So then it can set policy. So it does these things to make it a more profitable space for us to grow up in. So there's a real difference between us and it. Mm-hmm. We're small. We have all the attributes it has, which are the attributes of consciousness. It's just where we have memory and processing and make choices. Its memory and processing and so on is just deeper and larger than us. It functions at a much higher data rate, a much higher resolution. It functions at kind of the fastest cycle, you'd say. It's the delta T in its world is a lot smaller than the delta T in our world. We're a derivative of it, so we have to be downhill from it on the throughput. So
the delta T, which I guess would be equivalent to the Planck time in our world, you're suggesting in that world of the larger consciousness system, the delta T would be at the subquantum level.
Yeah, it's at a much smaller, much more refined space. Because when you create a virtual reality, you have to create a time loop because it's dynamic. Things change. So you create this time loop, and the time loop cannot be faster than the fundamental time of consciousness. So the fundamental time of consciousness, is so many, delta T of, or you say a frequency you turn in terms of not to frequency instead of time. So how often is the system updated, right? Well, if you look at the system, a physical system like ours, how often do you have to update it? Well, if you updated it every 10 seconds, we'd see jerky motion. Right. We move like that because in 10 seconds we can move. If you update it every 100th of a second, we would seem kind of fluid, but a lot of other things would seem kind of jerky. So you update it at kind of an optimal rate which gives you the resolution that's needed for that system, and you have a basic rate at which the whole thing was computed to begin with. And for us, that basic rate, the smallest rate that we can get to here, is the Planck length and the Planck
which is
time.
trillions of times a second.
Yes. One Planck time is about 10 to the minus 44 seconds. That's a very small fraction of a
trillions
second.
isn't even small enough.
No. Yes. Yeah, trillions are like powers to the 12.
Right.
And this is to the minus 44. So
much smaller.
Yeah, a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth.
But people would say in a digital reality, it's like our reality is popping in and out of existence many, many trillions of times a second.
Well, our reality doesn't really exist. So popping in and out of existence is not it. We're virtual reality. The virtual reality, in our viewpoint, in our experience, comes to us in a data stream.
I want you to repeat that sentence because I'm not sure it's sunk in.
Yeah, okay.
Our reality doesn't really exist.
As a reality. Okay, The Sims doesn't really exist. There is no place where little Sims characters run around and drive their cars and drink beer. The World of Warcraft, there is no reality where elves and magic users and other people fight monsters. There is no reality where that happens. It's just computed. So it's not like the Sims blinking out of existence, but the Sims are also run by a delta T. The Sims have to be updated so many times a second. And in the old days, the resolution was very poor. Every motion was jerky. Things did not have nice curved lines. They had very jagged lines because the resolution was poor. As the resolution goes up, then the smoother it gets, the more fluid it seems, and everything seems continuous and very fluid. So we have, in our virtual reality, we have also a delta T, just like the Sims do, just like the World of Warcraft does. And it's not that our reality blinks on and off, it's just that it's updated every so often. And the depth of that resolution, the end point, it can increase its revolution down to the point of Planck time. That's the limit. If you go past that, get smaller delta T's and smaller delta X's than that, you'd see the granularity of the world. Suddenly you see spaces. It stops here and another one's here and another one's here. You'd be able to see the pixels like you can see the pixels on a very blown up picture where you're just seeing, you take a little tiny piece of the picture and blow it up really big and you can see that the things in there are really come in chunks. They're not smooth at all. So that's the same with us. If you go down to the Planck length is where things stop being smooth. They start being chunks. And that includes space and time.
So the community of the larger consciousness system operating at a faster delta T would have the ability to intervene in our world.
It has, in my books, I just gave some numbers just as examples. I didn't mean them to be actual numbers, but examples. And I just hypothesized that the larger reality, the larger conscious system, probably has a billion cycles. A billion, 10 to the 9 times 10 to the 9, that's 10 to the 18th cycles of computing time between every one of our delta T's. So it's got a lot of processing it can do just between one delta T of ours and the next delta T. And I go through in book 1, I think the second half of book 1, and I talk about all these little things just to give people some numbers so they can get a sense of it. It makes it a little more concrete for people. So I made up numbers there, so that doesn't really mean anything. I say a billion is just an example. So something like that, though, would be reasonable. So it has like a billion cycles in its processing between every delta T of ours. Now, when we make models, we do the same thing. If we're making a model of a man, then if we update it every 100th of a second, it's totally smooth and fluid, and it looks like a real man. If we take that same model and try to use that for, let's say, a missile being fired, oh, it's really, really jerky. It disappears here and appears over there because 1/100th of a second, it can go a long distance in 1/100th of a second. So it depends on what you're modeling and what it's doing and how fast it's moving as to how much resolution. You don't want to compute everything at Planck length and Planck time because that would be a huge amount of computation for something that doesn't require it. That'd be like doing a man motion, every billionth of a second. Well, people don't move anything in a billionth of a second. There's nothing going on there. There'd be many, many billionths of a second before you could detect anything going on at all. So you do that kind of simulation at a much less of resolution and in a very advanced computer, and we do that here in our simulations. You have parts of that simulation running at different levels of resolution depending on, what is needed there. So that makes it more efficient. You don't have to run it all at real high resolution just because somebody over in CERN is smashing atoms when most of the population only needs 4 decimal places, to define their world.
So the larger consciousness system, the way you describe it, seems to have an interest in efficiency.
It does. It has an interest in efficiency, and that's one of the ways that you can kind of understand how and why it works. It wants to do things efficiently, otherwise it's a waste of resources. This system, though it is very large, is not infinite. No real system can be infinite. Infinity is just a mathematical expression of what you can approach, but you can never get there. Because if you could ever get there, you add 1 to it, and now you'd have a bigger number than infinity. You see, so it's only a theoretical space. It's not a real space. Anything real is going to be finite. If it's finite, it has a finite amount of resources. So efficiency is important to it like it would be, to us in our computer labs. You need to make processes be efficient.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'd like to do is share with you one of the most extraordinary paranormal events that was ever reported to me. You triggered my memory of it by bringing up the coastal areas of Africa. I interviewed years ago. It's available on the New Thinking Aloud channel if people know how to look. A fellow, a very interesting man, now deceased, from the country of Burkina Faso, which is near the African coast. He was a native of a village there, but he got educated. He went to the Sorbonne. He was a very sophisticated person, but he was trained in the shamanistic teachings of his culture, and his village told him, you go out into the Western world and represent us, which he has done. He's written books. He's talked about how beautiful his culture is. He believes that we can learn a lot of positive things from his culture. And he told me this story about his grandfather's funeral. His grandfather died, and now they're going to have a procession from wherever the body had been kept to the burial grounds. And they have xylophones, and they're playing the xylophones and creating, I suppose, rhythm and chanting. And what he described to me at this point, I've never been able to accept it. I've never been able to deny it because I trust this man. He wouldn't lie to me about it. He was a very serious person. But what he said happened is, as the xylophones began playing, his grandfather, deceased grandfather, stood up and walked in the procession to the burial ground with the other mourners, and he was then buried there. So what would your theory say about that?
Well, this is a virtual reality. Yeah. Reality is created by data streams. Mm-hmm. When you play World of Warcraft, that reality, that you are the consciousness for those players, you get that from a data stream from the computer, and it lights up 2 million pixels on your monitor, You look at those 2 million little dots of light and you see rivers and streams and forests and people and all sorts of things. You interpret that data based on what you know. You may see things in that data that you don't know what they are because you don't have any background in that. So, given that that's the reality, then what this man saw was what he got in the data stream. Now, this reality is a multiplayer game, just like World of Warcraft and The Sims. There's a lot of players that interact with each other. So if you do something that affects others, well, then that has to be played out. That other has to deal with whatever it is you did that affects them, and so on. So the people involved there, let's say all of them agreed that the old man got up and walked and laid down in his grave. Okay, well, then they all just got that in their data stream. That was what the system gave them in their data stream. So that's what they saw. That's how they interpreted it. And that was a real experience. It wasn't that they all hallucinated. It wasn't that they imagined it. They saw that. That was their reality. Right. And now, why would the larger consciousness system send them that in their data?
Well, that's my question.
Yeah. Well, because in that culture, that would be very meaningful. It would be very significant. It would show the deceased as a very powerful individual, and it would be a tribute to his power, his name, his family, or whatever else, that this miracle occurred. It would also open their minds to a bigger reality of possibilities than they had thought of. And from that culture, it wasn't so much that these are things that they couldn't think of, as that these are things they probably always were told in their culture, that reality is more. You know, that culture probably sees reality as more than just the physical. It sees reality as a magical place, a place of spirits, a place that the non-physical can manifest, and so on. So that was part of their reality. This wasn't like the shock that it would have been if this happened in New York, you know, and had a lot of...
He made it seem like this is the way we always do funerals.
Exactly. So these people were aware of that, and because of that, they're open to that. Nobody, you know, swooned and fell over on the ground. You know, it was something that expressed their own culture, their own understanding of reality, and it was a very, you know, a very big kind of kudo to the man that he got this kind of treatment by this larger spiritual system. So it was just a thing that then this friend of yours, he experienced that, and when he experienced it, it changed his mind. And he was a well-educated person, but he couldn't deny his experience. He was there. He saw it. Other people saw it. They discussed it afterwards. It's not like he was dreaming. It's not like it was a mass hallucination. None of those things made sense. So you have to say it's real. And when it's real, that opens up your mind to a large number of other possibilities of things that might be real and sets you on a path of seeking, sends you on a path of wonderment, sends you on a path of trying to understand the nature of this reality in which things like that could happen. So it's a thing that the larger conscious system would do just for the benefit of those people. It validated some of their own culture and their own ideas. And for this man, particularly, who was going to go into the Western world, it gave him a rock, a center from which he would not just become a Western person, drop his culture that he had there, that he grew up with, and say, well, that was all just a bunch of belief, baloney, and whatever, and become a Westerner. He would have this experience that he would take with him forever, and he knew that there was a spiritual world, that there was, you know, the potential and possibility for these things to happen because it happened to him. And that then kept him tied to his roots like nothing else would have. So it may have just happened for him, who knows? But it probably happened for everybody there. So everybody got that. If he was the only one that got it, he'd say, hallucination. But since everybody got it, you can't say hallucination. Everybody doesn't just get the same hallucination. And I'm sure these people weren't all, taking peyote or ayahuasca as part of their ceremony. These were people who were all sane and sober, doing a very solemn thing. And it gave him a grounding that he needed, because he was going to go into the Western world where all of that would have been ridiculous and impossible. And once he got immersed in that world, over time, he'd start feeling like, maybe it is impossible. Maybe, these are active. He would start to erode his understanding of that big picture. So I suspect he was one of the main reasons of why this happened. So he would have that rock, that center, that yes, he could be just as sophisticated as any other, PhD or any other whatever it is he became. But at the same time, he knew that reality was capable of doing amazing things, and that there was a spiritual component to it. And though he probably wouldn't talk about it to his friends, he could talk about it to you, because you also understood that the world isn't just buttoned down materialist world. So you were kind of a safe person he could share it with. And he probably really enjoyed sharing it, because he probably kept it bottled up inside for a long, long time, unable to share it. So the sharing was probably also helpful to him. So that's why the system would do it. For him, for the others, it validated their culture, their understanding of reality, that the dead man gets up and walks and lies down in his coffin.
If we view these paranormal events as simply modifications of the data stream, it would seem that there would be very few limits in terms of what is possible.
Yes, the limits are set by the larger consciousness system. And it is constrained. It doesn't just do anything randomly. It is constrained to do those things that are helpful to people, to help them grow up, help them become more embodiments of love, less embodiments of greed and self-centeredness. Help them see bigger pictures rather than little pictures that are basically full of fighting and fuming and fussing and complaining and all the negativity stuff. So that's its constraint. It won't do something just for the hell of it. It won't do something, to make people, it might like to make people laugh. It's got a good sense of humor, but it does things that it thinks will be helpful to us. Because, as I said, it's motivated. If we evolve, it evolves. We all are kind of in this together.
Well, it's not as if the paranormal is always positive.
Well, for the most part it is, but it depends on the person doing it. If you are a negative person, let's say you're a person and you have a fair amount of fear. The average person has a lot of fear.
Sure.
And let's say you just spontaneously end up in an out-of-body. You may be terrified. Suddenly you find yourself in some place that you don't know, and as soon as you realize you're no longer in Kansas, you're frightened because you're in a space that you don't know. What kind of creatures or critters or things might be there? You don't know. It's new.
It happens. People get frightened.
People are afraid of what they don't understand. They're afraid of things that are new. So yes, they can have a very scary experience, but that's because of the fear that they have.
Well, there is in the anthropological literature, an anthropologist named Ronald Rose wrote a book about it, and in which he referred to a ritual practiced in certain indigenous cultures called the pointing of the bones. And it's a hex, it's a death hex. And they documented cases where people were hexed. They didn't know that they were hexed. They were not even in the same country. I think this was a case of somebody from Cuba, in a Cuban society, but the person was in Florida. And he had been hexed by some practitioners of voodoo or something of that sort in Cuba. And the person suddenly, mysteriously died.
Sure. That happens. Voodoo is a real thing. And that is just the fact that in consciousness, this is one of the kind of the rules in consciousness, is that you can modify probabilities with your intent. That's how we heal. That's how we hurt people. That's how we make them sick. That's how voodoo kills people, is by modifying the probabilities.
What does that mean, modifying the probability? Since a probability is a mathematical...
It is. The way this, you have to understand the way this reality works. It's not I said it's a simulation, but it's not from a ground-up simulation. We don't start with, the
top-down simulation.
It's a top-down simulation. It's a simulation that's done in probability. Now, if you have a bottoms-up simulation, you know what's going to happen next because it's just a derivative of what happened last. But if you have a probabilistic reality, you don't know what happens next because of because of what happened last. You have choices of things that could happen. So let's say there's 10 things that are possible. So if there's 10 things that are possible, each one is not necessarily of equal probability. Right. So you have 10 things, each one has a probability of happening. And one may be 1 in 1,000, another one may be 1 in 1,000,000, and one may be 1 out of, almost 1 out of 1, say a 0.9. Yeah. Or a 0.8 and a 0.00001. So what happens is that when the measurement's made, that means when you see what's there or what happens or the next thing happens, then what is that thing going to be? Well, the system takes a random draw from that probability distribution, which means it's most likely that 0.9 thing or that 0.8 thing is going to be chosen. But that 1 in 1,000 thing could be chosen. Right. It's like a raffle, and you've got only one ticket has your name on it. Out of 10,000 tickets, what's the probability? It's 1 in 10,000 that you get that. Right. But what if you put 1,000 tickets in there, or 10,000 tickets in there, and there were only 20,000 tickets? Well, now you've got a 50-50 chance that on that draw it'll get you. So that
in other words, somebody who is here in the simulation is able to influence the computer.
Yes. Well, they influence the data with which the computer works.
Okay.
Is what they're doing.
That data must be stored in the computer.
Yeah, that data is in a database. The computer is basically consciousness. So the data is stored in consciousness. That's what the Hindus referred to as the Akashic records. This is data. The system needs the data that says what are the possibilities and what are the probabilities of each possibility. And we call that the future probable database. Or it's more like the probable future database. I said that backwards. It looks at the probable future, all the things that could happen and the probability they do. As time goes on, that becomes past. Everything that could have happened and the probability that it would have. Right. Okay, so we have this database sitting out there that the system needs because, something is about to happen, and it could be this way, this way, this way, or that way. Different probabilities. What actually happens? Well, what's it's not what the choice is, but what's a result of that choice. Yep. Okay, the choice is ours, but the result of that choice is this draw. So most of the time it looks like, that's probable. All of the time that's possible, because it never draws anything that's impossible. Well, they all have to be possibilities. Right. So it's always something that's possible, but sometimes it's very unlikely, even though it's possible. So knowing that it works that way. So we have this probability distribution.
Based on history.
Yeah, we have this probability distribution now of all the things that are possible in the probability. Okay. So now given that, the system uses that distribution. Right. Okay, so now you got the guy who's in Florida, and there's a probability that he's going to get a rare disease, or he's going to,
drop dead.
Going to drop dead and have a heart attack. Yeah. These are possibilities.
There's always a possibility.
And if his heart is defective in some way, then that probability of heart attack's higher. Yeah. So it can take that, and now the probability of getting ill, say from a heart attack, goes up. If somebody says, with their intent, raise that probability of that man getting ill, of that man being hurt. So now he did have a 1 in 10 of having a heart attack. Now he has, 4 in 10 of getting a heart attack. So you can modify probabilities to heal someone, You can modify the probabilities to hurt someone. You can modify the probabilities to make the sun shine next Saturday.
As you've described it, the larger consciousness system holds these probabilities in its memory because they're based on history. So if you're modifying the probability, are you interfering with history?
No. These are the probabilities. Okay, the possibilities are history.
Yes.
The probabilities also are judged to be from history, what is likely to happen, right? Probabilities. But these probabilities can be changed, can be modified by us. So we're not modifying history. History's still the way it is. But we can modify that probability that's there right now. Now, these probabilities change. Every time I make a choice, that changes things. Because of that choice, the probabilities all shift around a little bit. So they're constantly shifting around, the probabilities. They're in flux. And with your intent, you can make this one just right a little higher in the pile or a little lower in the pile.
Through an act of psychokinesis?
No, just by intent.
By intent?
Just intention.
I mean, in this case of the man who died suddenly, would the intent be, as you suggested earlier, to weaken his heart?
Could be, if that's what he had. You could just ask the database, show me a picture of this man's health. What is his health? And you could get that. Oh, he's got this. He's got a heart problem. I see that problem. He's got a liver problem. He's got these problems. So that data's in there too. You see, that's of all the things that happen, that data is part of it.
The Akashic Records has all knowledge.
Has all that knowledge in it. So because that data's there, and the reason that data's there is that it's part of a virtual reality. It's been computed and put in somebody's data stream. So it has all that data, but now it has it in also the probability in this future probable database. So you can modify those probabilities. And you would, if you were a practitioner of voodoo, you'd find weaknesses, and then you'd work on those weaknesses. And if you found somebody who was just really healthy and very strong and had a strong intention, you'd probably fail, and it wouldn't work. You can't do anything you want. All you can do is raise and lower probabilities a certain amount. So you found somebody, though, that had a weakness or a problem that was kind of under the surface, or you found somebody that you were going to work on for the next 3 years, and somebody that was fearful, then it's much easier. That's why when in the voodoo practice, you take a little doll and you make it up, put that person's name on it, and you stick a pin through its heart or something, and you send it to that person. Why do you think they do that? They do that to create fear in that person. Because once that person is frightened, that is now an energetic connection that can be used. If that person's not frightened at all, it's very hard to affect that person.
In the case of the individual in Florida, my understanding is he had no knowledge of the ritual that had been...
So the fear would make it easier, but it's not necessary. It just makes it easier. So most people practicing this will try to scare the person first, because that makes the whole job simpler. If you don't have that opportunity because you don't know where they live, or you're just being paid for somebody that lives 1 million miles away, you do it without it. But you can still do that.
So the larger consciousness system, even though it is inherent in that system to try to optimize things for negative entropy or lowered entropy, it's still going to allow a certain amount of negativity.
It will allow whatever negativity we do. We have free will. We have free will to be nasty. We have free will to be loving. It's our choice. These tools with consciousness, it's like a knife. A knife can be a very good thing. You may need it to cut a package open. It could be a wonderful thing, but it could also be a weapon. It can hurt someone. It's not that the knife is evil or bad. It's what you do with it. So these rules and the way consciousness works, the way we get to modify reality with our intent, it's a feedback mechanism. We were given that mechanism so that the world we live in is basically our creation from us, our thinking, modifies these realities. So if we're very negative, we create negative things. If we're positive, we create a more positive world. You look at the news and you look at what the world is today, well, that's a very accurate representation of the quality of consciousness of humanity. That's where we are.
Yeah.
So it's any schoolhouse has to have feedback mechanism, how you're doing. This is our feedback mechanism. So that's kind of why we have that rule that we can modify future probability. That gives us the feedback of how we're doing. Mm-hmm. If we live in a wonderful, lovely, supporting, happy, joyful place, well, that's because we've fed that positive, joyful, happy energy to this database, and we make the probability of that go higher. And that's why people who hang out with us in our joyful place, they feel more joyful too. You go visit that Swami or that Guru or that person who's always smiling and is happy and positive, you feel more happy and positive just hanging out with them. Yeah. Okay? Because, you see, you pick up some of that collective consciousness, makes you happy and you feel more joyful. So we help pull ourselves up or drag ourselves down. We create the environment we have to live in. Well, it's like, you have to sleep in the bed you make, or whatever. You have to live in the world that you help create. So that, and sometimes, of course, let's say I want a sunny day next Saturday because I'm going to have a picnic, but somebody else who's a farmer wants it to rain next Saturday because his crops are dry. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to change the probability to have more sunshine. He's trying to change the probability to have rain. Well, that's the way the system works. I'm pushing it this way. He's pushing it that way. It ends up wherever it is, and that's what happens. So eventually when clouds form and things happen, there's a lot of randomness in that. It's not something you can predict for long periods of time. Well, all those things are figured into it. A random draw is taken from whatever probabilities happen to be there at the time, and that's what happens.
Well, now you're reminding me of a fascinating study done by my friend and colleague Roger Nelson, who was at Princeton University. He was wondering about exactly that because they have the graduation ceremony every June, I believe, at Princeton, and it's outdoors, I think probably in a big stadium somewhere. And so he looked at the weather, both before and during and after the graduation ceremonies, and he determined, statistically speaking, it was sunny much more often than it should be, and it rained much less often than it should be on graduation day in Princeton.
Sure. Well, there's a whole lot of people looking forward to that graduation day. All the students graduating, all their families, and all the professors are going to have to be walking around, and it's going to have to be held in a gym or some other place that's tight and uncomfortable and muggy. So, yes, a lot of people putting positive energy into that outcome. And there probably wasn't many people putting much energy into the opposite outcome. So then they have a higher probability of changing it. So it's not that you can get whatever you want, but you can influence things. And realize that other people also have influence over the same sorts of things. And the system simply lets that play out. However it does its random draw, that's what you get. And that's then reality. Now that's going to be justified, because if that's the reality, then things will be such to make that reality seem reasonable. Mm-hmm. Suddenly a storm will blow up and you'll see clouds out on the horizon, and then it'll darken and then it'll rain. And it seems like the rain came out of nowhere. But it didn't just one instant it was sunny and a microsecond later, it was pouring rain. No, that wouldn't work. But you'll see that the environment will sort itself out so that everything is justified, and any hand in that something else has been at play will be deniable.
I have heard reports about people making it rain suddenly, and it starts like that. It comes down in a torrent and stops just as suddenly, because that's what they wanted to experiment with.
Yeah. Oh, and there used to be a thing called cloud busting.
Yes.
That you could make clouds come.
People still practice that.
Yeah. There's lots of things. There's lots of ways that you can play with this intent. You can use it to heal.
Yeah.
You can use it to get data out of the database with your intent. Your mind queries the database. And the database is set up just very much like, say, Google's set up with the database. You query it, it sends you information back. If your query is sloppy or not well defined, or there could be 100 answers to that query, then you'll get nonsense, or you'll get a whole bunch of things, and you'll get one of them. Let's say there's 100 things that would suit your query. Well, you just get a random draw, and you'll get one of them, and that's the one you get to suit your query. So it's important that you give a well-defined, unique query as best you can. And if it doesn't come back the way you want, you need to modify it a little bit, just like you do with Google. Sometimes it takes you 5 or 10 cycles around that query machine before you finally can isolate what you want to get out of it. And this works the same way. So it's a matter of the data is all there. It's available. And people say, well, what about privacy? All that data's there about everything? And I said, yes, everything you've done, the ugliest things you've done, the worst thing you've done, the best things you've done, your attitudes, your feelings, all of it is there. Things you thought about but never did, it's all there, okay? But very few people know how to access it, and if they access it for high entropy reasons, they will eventually lose their library card and they won't be allowed to get any more. They will find it frustrating, and they will get worse and worse at the skill until it doesn't work anymore, because the system can do that and still not show that it's doing anything at all. So it does suppress misuse of the system to some extent.
Well, Martin Luther King famously said, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice.
Yes.
And that seems to be your point.
Yes, absolutely. So we, as a human race, have been evolving for about 200,000 years. Control, power, force, warlord mentality for out of 200,000, 195,000 years, We're doing that same thing. Now, we're improving as that goes, but it's just tiny little improvements. But the good thing about evolution is that the more you learn, the easier it is to learn more. So the more you grow up, the easier it is to take the next step and grow up even more. So if you look at that evolution, you'll see that though it stayed the same for a very long time in the last 500 years, even in the last 1,000 years, you can see more evolutionary growth than there was in the 190,000 years or 199,000 years before that. So you look at that, and then if you just take that and look at just the last 500 years, wow, you'll say big thing, a lot of advances have been made. And then if you just look at the last 10 years, you'll see the same thing. So the rate of growth is increasing, and we're growing more quickly. And now we've got into the information age, very aptly named. It's all about information. This is the age where we finally realize who we are and what we are and how it works. This is the information age, and suddenly humanity has become a family. Well, they squabble like a family, of course, but now we can have this conversation. You'll publish this conversation on YouTube or the web or somewhere. People will see it. They'll send it other places.
Oh, yes.
And
half of our viewers are outside of the United States.
Yeah, same with half of my people that are come to my website consistently are outside the United States. So now this is a world community because the internet has made it so. Now, one person can talk to, preach to, discuss things with 500,000 people, 500 million people, and can do it overnight. It used to be you get up on your soapbox and maybe 50 people could hear you. After 50 people, they were too far away. They couldn't hear you unless you had a really strong voice. But now it's not so much local anymore. So these little bubbles of enlightenment that we always have had in every land and every culture, you have these little bubbles of enlightenment where people figure it out, but they've always been local, and they've never come together. But now we have the infrastructure for them not to be local and to come together. Humanity's never been in that spot before. So now I think in the next 2 or 3 decades, we're going to see very big leaps forward in becoming a kinder, gentler, better society. Now, you look at current events, you probably think we're going backwards, but sometimes you have to regress before you go forward. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but even if we back up, let's say we de-evolve, well, evolution has this wonderful property of being relentless. It just keeps chugging along. You can de-evolve, but it just keeps chugging along. You can have a meteor wipe out 90% of all the life forms on the planet, and another 1,000,000 years from now, it's all full of things again. It just keeps chugging along. So we will get there. Eventually, humanity will be a family, and it will be a family in peace and happiness and abundance, and it will work well. But whether that's, in a decade or in a millennia, we don't know, but we're trying to speed that up as much as possible.
Well, speaking of a decade or a millennia, let's talk about time travel.
Okay.
I know that you do address that in your book.
Yes. Well, the time travel that makes Hollywood movies is you get into a little machine and it teleports you to some other time.
Right.
Okay. That does not exist. It doesn't work that way. But what you can do that's just about as good is that if you develop your intuitive side and you can get into this database, you can go into that past database and see pretty much anything you want to see. You just have to have a good query. And if you want to know what it was like, 20,000 years ago, well, there you go. How would you like to know? Well, I'd like to see pictures. I'd like to see a movie, okay? And I would like to be at the, such and such a place or whatever. You have to be specific. Otherwise, you just get very general stuff, or you put in a very general query. You be specific, and you'll get the data that will show you that, okay? Now, that history is very detailed, but as time goes back, the detail gets less and less. Yeah. And the reason for that is that the system is very efficient, and it tends to delete bits that haven't been used for a long time. So if you want to go back and find out who your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was, and now you're back, say, in 10,000 BC or something, well, you can go back there, but what you're going to get is a picture of generally the way it was, and generally the way somebody who was your grandfather would have been. You're not necessarily going to get the detail anymore because nobody is asked to see that for 1,000 years. So that data's just been sitting there, not being used, not being expressed. But it keeps it levels it. What can we say? It keeps the flavor of it. It keeps the general sense of it, and it'll maintain that probably forever. But the details. What did your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather have for lunch, on his 25th birthday? Well, that won't be there. But they can show you a picture of somebody from that age eating lunch, and you can find out kind of what the lunch is composed of and that sort of thing. So it gets more general and more probabilistic the further back you go. But if you only want to go back a couple of thousand years, that's pretty detailed.
Well, how would you distinguish between the information from the past or any other distant location or the future coming from the Akashic records or the database as opposed to your own fantasy?
Well, that's true even in the bigger picture. How do I know that any of the things I say are real and I'm not just making them up? Yeah. That's kind of the whole picture. And the answer to that is there is no way to be certain. There's very little certainty in this world. I can't say that all the things that I think are facts are absolutely facts, 100%. To say that would be foolish. I don't necessarily have all the information that'll ever be known about those things. So you don't know for sure, but you can get a sense of what the probabilities are. You can get a sense of how likely is this to be a fact, or is it just a fact now? It may not be a fact always, So you can get a sense of that just from experience. Like here's a similar thing. When you get information from the database, when you go on an out-of-body or whatever you're doing, there's a couple of things going on. One, you can only get information from 3 sources. It either comes from the larger conscious system, it comes from some other consciousness, or it comes from yourself. You're a piece of consciousness. You can create information. Just like the larger conscious system can create information streams, you can create information streams too. They don't have tags on them. It's not like, here's a tag. When it comes in here, I know that's the larger conscious system, and I know this is some other conscious, and I know this is mine. They all come in a jumble. Sometimes parts of what you get are pieces of all 3 of those. And there's no tags. You can't sort them out and say, this is from that. But with practice, and if you've done this for a long time and hundreds of times, you get a sense of where it's coming from, because each one of these sources has its own feel. Now, that feel isn't really objective in the sense that I can say, well, it feels like this, it's prickly, and this one's smooth. It's not like that. You just have a feel, just like you have a feeling that somebody's looking at you. You just get a feeling. So you can get the feel of that. When it comes from a larger conscious system, it's like this. It's clear, it's firm, it's steady, it's this way. When it comes from another consciousness, it's a little more tentative, it's a little slower, it isn't as crisp. When it comes from yourself, it's imaginative, and it changes, and it's this way, and then it's that way. It's much less buttoned down. So you can kind of tell from the sense of what you get with practice. So when you get messages, when you get things, you don't know whether you're making it up, that's you, whether you're getting it from somebody else's mind, or whether it's something right out of the larger conscious system. So are you sure? Are you sure that's right? No. You're never 100% sure, but what's your probability? And I may put probabilities of 0.99999 because I'm real certain, because I've interacted that way before and it's always been right. And I may put something 0.8 on something else and 0.5 because it could be either way, and maybe even a 0.1 if I think it's pretty flaky. But then those probabilities can change. So that thing I made a 0.1 may come up to a 0.3, and then maybe a 0.7, and then maybe a 0.8, and something that was at a 0.99 may go back down to a 0.6. So as you get more information and you get more experience, you let all of these things called your knowledge slide up and down on this scale of probability of being true. And very rarely do you stick anything at 1 or at 0. Then most everything, sometimes it's 10 to the minus 20. Really, really, really improbable. But mostly it's on this scale, and those things slide. Now, most people don't like that because they don't like uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty in their life is a problem.
But what you're saying is that we live in a simulation based on uncertainty.
Exactly. Uncertainty is part of how we are and what we are. It's that psi uncertainty principle that affects your ability to demonstrate your psi, and it's that uncertainty in those probability things that allow you to modify that. So uncertainty is a very key part of the way this reality works, and you have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. And with that comes the idea that you should stop trying to manipulate the world to be the way you know it should be, and you just accept the world the way it is. And then what's important is not what happens. What's important is what you do about it. what you do with it, the quality of your choice. So then you begin to live with uncertainty gracefully because, what happens, happens. Might be hard, might be rough, a child may die, you may win the lottery, and all kinds of things are possible to happen, but you let them happen as they do, and you deal with them with positive, caring intent. So that's kind of, you live your life and you don't care a whole lot about uncertainty. You don't need to manipulate things to be the way you want. Mm-hmm. And you find there's a lot more joy in life and a lot less stress when you have that attitude. So no, there is no certainty, but you gain confidence based on experience. So if I have communication, say, with a certain non-physical being, I've been interacting with him since I was 5 years old. I have confidence now that the things I get are always right. I've never gotten anything that was misleading. So when I have something from that end, I have confidence.
Now you're speaking actually about your own experience.
Yeah, this is just my own experience. Yeah. So I feel confident about that, and I give it a 0.99.
Well, we haven't talked about this non-physical being too much.
Yeah. No, we can. Yeah. But things all have a certain amount of uncertainty involved with them. You're never really certain about anything. And if that frightens you or upsets you or gives you panic attacks, that's a problem. You need to be able to say, life is uncertain. I get affected by all the things that other people do. This last election, a lot of people were involved in that, and however it came out, however it did, and I have to deal with that. And the people that were glad, they're celebrating. The people that weren't glad, they're not celebrating. But it doesn't really matter so much as you deal with it, and not deal with it by moping and crying and being upset or whatever. You just accept it and deal with it.
In a way that lowers entropy.
In a way that lowers entropy for the system. Mm-hmm. Because if you get upset and angry about it, then you become part of the problem. Mm-hmm. You're just one more angry, high entropy individual, no matter what side you're on, and you're part of the problem. To not be part of the problem, to be part of the solution, you have to respond with kindness and caring and forgiveness and tolerance and all those other things that are positive. And then you can be happy and you can be very positive, even if the world all around you is going to hell in a handbasket. You're okay, because things are the way they need to be. And by that I mean everybody has to change themselves from inside. You can't change anybody. And if you try to change them and force change on them, you'll just make them worse. They'll retreat deeper into whatever dysfunction they've got. So the best thing you can do is give them a positive environment in which it's easier for them to see different ways and change. So knowing that, then the therefore, the only thing you can really do is change yourself. You're the only person you have control over it, and you can change yourself. So make sure that you are the most positive, caring, loving person that you can be, and you've just optimized your contribution to the whole system, to the world in general.
Subscribe 100% to what you just said. But let's go back to time travel. You seem to be suggesting time travel isn't even travel. It's more a question of what we might call retrocognition in parapsychology. Yeah. But you also seem to imply then that the future, you can't go to the future, it hasn't happened yet.
No, you can. You can explore the future just fine, but you explore the future probability. Mm-hmm. It's not done yet. It's just a probable future, and you have to realize those probabilities, can change. Events change them. Your choices change them. So you can go into the probable future, and you can say, if I take this job, where is that? What's going to be my economic state 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later? And you'll look at the probabilities, the possibilities and the probabilities. Now you can say, I want to see this in pictures. I want to see it like in little movie clips. I want to see me 5 years and 10 years and 20 years out. If I take this job, where will I be living? What will I be doing? What will my life be like? And, you can say, I want to see the most probable things that are going to happen. You could say, I'd like to see the third most probable thing that would happen, and you would get those. Mm-hmm. And you may be able to say, okay, I've seen what's probable. Now, how probable is it? Give me a curve that shows me the variation, the statistics. How many, is it a 3 sigma? Is it a 10 sigma? What's the volatility of what I'm getting?
I mean, you can have some kind of a dialogue with the larger consciousness system.
It'll print out, it'll give you graphs in colors, it'll do mathematics, it'll give you statistics. So you can not only, let's say you're healing somebody, and you can say, well, okay, what's the health of this person going to be over the next 20 years? And you get it in increments, and you can see that. And then you can say, well, if this is the most probable, put error bars on that. So in the beginning, the error bars are small, but as you go further out, those error bars get bigger because changes happen out there. It's harder to predict what's going to happen out there. So you'll see the error bars will get bigger, and you'll get some idea whether, if the error bars are real tight, then that's almost a shoo-in for happening. Mm-hmm. The error bars get bigger, then it may or may not happen within a certain amount of variation on either side. So yes, the system will give you, the system's good at math. It'll gives you whatever you ask for.
Let me ask you this question. It's just popped into my mind. The star Betelgeuse is about 600 light years away, I believe. Mm-hmm. And astronomers are saying it's going to go supernova. They know that much about it from the information we now have. It's variable and it's showing signs that so that could happen. I have read in astronomy magazines it might happen tomorrow or it might happen in the distant future. We don't know because we're talking about astronomical time, but we know that it takes 600 years for the light from Betelgeuse to reach us.
Right, could have already happened.
So it could have already happened. Right. That's my point.
Right, sure.
And if I could take my consciousness out 600 light years, I might know whether it's already happened or when it's going to happen. And perhaps, let's just say in Las Vegas, there's a lottery to determine when does Betelgeuse go supernova. And I know it's going to happen in 10 days. So I put all my money down in Las Vegas. Could I then make a fortune?
Well, yes, that's possible. Mm-hmm. I know people who make a living by working in Vegas. I actually went to a group that Marty Rosenblatt runs.
Yes, I've been there.
That does that, and I gave a little talk at that meeting twice.
That's right. They do sports betting.
Yeah, and there are people there who make their living that way, and they make a good living that way. Mm-hmm. But as I listened to those people and got to know them, I also saw that the ones that were successful were ones that didn't abuse it. Mm-hmm. They made what they needed to get by, and they were generous. Yeah. They gave back. They were helpful. And the system didn't have a problem with that. They'll let that go. Mm-hmm. If what you do is you're going to get that money so you'll be richer than anybody, and it's probably not going to work out for you because that's going to be high entropy. So the system would probably make you lose. When you just thought, I want to bet it all on the next one, it's gone. Just to let you know that kind of an attitude isn't going to be supported. Mm-hmm. So that's things that it can do with deniable, deniable causality. That anything happens. So yes, it's possible, but where it becomes kind of a lifestyle, like it was with some of these people, you also find good people who care, who are not abusive, they're not trying to get rich, they're trying to get by, and they spend their time volunteering and talking and doing other things that are actually helpful. So yes, it's possible that you can read things in a database and then win in Las Vegas, but not if you're doing it for the wrong reason. There was a guy that I read about who was very good, sort of like Uri Geller, he's very good at getting this data out of the database. And he was guessing, lottery numbers that were winners. And he'd done this a couple of times, and he was right. Mm-hmm. But he never bought a ticket. But he could guess what they were, and he'd done that 2 or 3 times. So he was telling his friends about it. So the next one, he actually wrote down what it was, and he put that in a safe that he couldn't get to just to make sure he wasn't cheating. So they put that in a safe, and sure enough, he got the right number, the next one, all the digits. So then he went out and he bought a ticket. And he tried to make that ticket be the winning ticket. Well, what happened is he had all the right numbers, but in the wrong sequence. Every number was 1 digit off from the number it was supposed to be. So it was like a 6672. He'd have a 5561. You know, he's just 1 digit off, and through the whole thing, from end to end, he was off 1 digit. And it just, you know, it was some humor from the larger conscious system is that, no, this isn't going to work. So yes, people can do that, but if it's feeding their own egos, then no. And this happens to remote viewers. It's the same thing. You know, we've had some stellar remote viewers that were really, really good, and they're right probably 95% of the time. They hit it perfectly. And then they kind of get full of themselves, and they'll get this picture in the same way they always get their true pictures, and it's of a big buildings and things on the dark side of the moon or something like that. So they get these pictures of all of this stuff, and it's of the same quality they always get. And because they're famous and because they're most always right, they talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then we get a satellite that goes across around the moon, and they look at all that area, and there's nothing there. So, they got it wrong. Well, I think what happens that many of these stars tend to have a trajectory where their stardom goes up and up and up and up to a point where they get a little cocky and a little bit too much ego, and the system will give them some really spectacularly wrong answers just to take them down a peg or two, because it wants to support, people being honest, people doing things for the right reason. I just want to show the world that this is possible, to help wake the world up. That's a good reason. I want to do this to impress people because I'm special. That's not a good reason. And we see these stars that come up, and then they kind of fizzle at some point where they go from kind of honestly just trying to see what happens to trying to impress themselves.
Well, you've had many experiences of a paranormal nature yourself. I gather you have made a point of not getting ego entrapped by them.
Yes, of course. Matter of fact, I refuse to talk about them, and to all my audience, say, tell us some stories. You know, what's it like out on the larger conscious system? What about sex in the astral plane? And I don't tell them stories. I say, no, I don't want to tell you stories. I said, go read Bob Monroe's book. He tells you all kinds of stories, and a lot of other people will too. I said, but I don't, for a couple of reasons. And the biggest reason is that if you tell people things that are outside of their experience, they have no way to process it. And when you have no way to process it, it leaves you in a place of frustration. And it leaves you in a place often where you just make something up. Mm-hmm. One side or the other, you decide to believe it or not believe it. Yeah. And neither one of those are useful. If you believe it, that could be going down la-la lane. You don't believe it, that could be going down la-la lane. Neither one's useful. You should place it somewhere on, well, maybe I'll give it a 50-50 and see if you get more information later to move that from, higher or lower than the 50-50. So anyway, I don't tell people about things because they can't process it. They won't really understand it. They'll understand it from their own perspective, which comes to the wrong conclusion. They will see me more of I don't know, more of a special person. I don't want to be a special person because that undermines what it is I'm trying to do. So I don't want to be that special person that does miraculous things. That's whatever. Now, sometimes it comes out. I've got a young lady who is writing a book about her interactions with me and her life and so on. And it's going to come out probably in the next couple of months. She's been writing it for a few years. And there's some very interesting healing and other things that happened there. And
Sophia Kuzmin.
I've never told that story to anybody.
Yeah.
But she's writing the book, and it's all from her perspective. She's a lovely lady. And I let things happen as they happen. I say, oh, no, don't tell my story. You tell my story. It was your story, too. So you can tell it. So I let things come out as they do. But I don't make any effort to enhance that or be that. I don't want to have a, I said it last time, I don't want an organization based on personality. I don't want a personality cult thing going, because that will destroy the organization that you're trying to create.
You wouldn't want your theory to be known as Tom Campbell's theory of everything?
No, I don't care. If it's named that, or if it's named Jeffrey Mishlove's theory of everything, that's fine with me, as long as the ideas go out there and are used. It matters not. And I can't make that happen by myself. I can't make, a billion people understand this. It's going to be thousands of other people like yourself that are going to put pieces out here and pieces out there. People are going to go out and talk about it and talk about their own experiences. And it's the tens of thousands of people working together that are actually going to change the world. I'm just trying to give them a center understanding to make sense, to make a science out of all of it, because otherwise it's easy to say, rubbish. Show me the proof. Where's the logic? And dismiss it. Whereas if you can really understand them and show them the logic, then it's a lot harder to dismiss, because that same logic that explains the paranormal explains quantum physics, relativity, and a whole bunch of other scientific and philosophical issues that aren't done. That's kind of hard to throw away. You can't say, let's just dismiss. Oh, yeah, it gets all these things right. And yeah, it's real simple and doesn't have many assumptions and so on, so we can throw that out. That's harder to do. So if I can provide that center core, I'm happy for the rest of the world to take it and go do whatever they can do with it. And if my name doesn't touch it, that's fine. I could care less. If it works, if it actually helps make this world a better place sooner, then it's all worthwhile. So that's my part in it. So that's one reason I don't tell stories, because it'll just make me more special. And being special, I see, is a problem. It takes people's minds off of what I'm trying to say and on to me. So I say, well, this is the way life works, and here's, you should live your life this way. And they're going, oh yeah, he can do this and he's done that, and let that go. It's not important. Okay. So that's my viewpoint. So I don't do that. I've never told stories. Now I do to maybe a few people, but not in public. Friends, I tell stories to if it's pertinent, if I think it will help them, if it gives them it's kind of an understanding that would be significant for them, I'll do that. But I won't stand up and do that in a public thing, because even though there's only 20 people in the audience, there's going to be 200,000 people eventually who watch that, and I'll do more harm than good.
Considering that the larger consciousness system can create simulations, and I think you've pointed out many different ones. This is not the only simulation. If you're having a dream, that's a completely different data stream.
Right. Different rules.
You could also then, I would think, in theory, have a data stream come to you, which is that you build a time machine and you sit down in the time machine and you visit the future and or another planet and spend 3 weeks there and come back.
Sure, you can build that in your dream. Yeah. But that just then becomes a tool. Mm-hmm. That time machine is not fundamental. It's just a tool.
Right.
It's just like we can use a tool like healers. light workers, right? They take this beam of white light and they get rid of all that black stuff, because that black stuff is a symbol for what's wrong, and the white light is a symbol for what can fix what's wrong. And those are just tools. There's nothing fundamental about that.
Well, you've suggested that what we call our physical reality is like that. It's just a tool for us to evolve.
Exactly, it is. So tools can work. So if you, in your mind, you build a time machine and you have it you keep it in a lab that you also build in your mind, and you can give this time machine the properties of what it does and the dials and how you do it. That's just another way. That's a tool to help you focus your intent on doing that.
Right.
So if you just try to focus if you just don't use tools like healing. If I say, okay, somebody's got cancer or something I'm going to heal, and I just go heal. That usually doesn't work because it doesn't really involve you enough. So if I see the black spot and I work on it, all I'm doing is doing the same things with my intent, but I'm using this tool to focus my intent.
Yes.
Because people like concrete things to work with.
Yep.
Oh, a concrete black spot, concrete light beam, and I can burn that black spot away or whatever. So that's kind of takes it out of the totally abstract mind into a more concrete thing that's based on things we understand, like laser beams burning away things, you see. So it makes it easier for people to do. So they make these tools up. The light beams, there's no light. There's no black stuff. These are all just symbols that we use to focus our intent. And you can do the same thing with a time machine. And that time machine may have very specific attributes of the way it works, and you get in and do that. And all you're doing is focusing your intent on that trip that you're going to take, and then you take it. So the time machine is just a tool. It's not fundamental. It's not doing anything other than helping you focus your own intent.
The way you've described it, but suppose it's not just an exercise in imagination, but let's suppose I'm an inventor and I decide that I have a physical way to travel through time, and I build something that I think will work. And if the larger consciousness system wished to allow the rules to facilitate that experience, then it would happen and it would seem perfectly real and physical.
Okay. Again, that would be a tool, even though it's a physical thing that you build out of electronic components and wood and metal. Yeah. Okay. It's still just going to be a tool. Because what you actually are doing then, you get in your tool and you set all your dimensions, you turn on the juice, and you physically are not going to go back to a future or a past, back to a past, up to a future. It's not, those things aren't physical. They were never physical to begin with. They're just information. They were just part of a computation, part of a database. So they're not really there. There is no past that exists that's physical. It never was physical in the first place. So what you do then is that you can get in there and you can have an intention to go to the database at the time of the dinosaurs, because you'd like to see one up close and personal, or maybe from a distance. So you do that. Okay, well, again, this machine is focusing your intent. Your intent's going to the database, getting the data, bringing it back to you. And yes, it's just like being there. Out of bodies are just like being there. You see, you feel, you smell, you touch. It's like they're physical. They can be. They don't have to be. But they can be very physical. So you're getting that data. Another thing you could do is, if the larger conscious system wanted to support you, it could give you a data stream about dinosaurs and where you are. Now you're a little guy with a skin around your waist and you're running, hiding behind rocks, and you could experience that. But that's a data stream. There is no past to go to that exists in a physical sense. There never was one. So you're not going to take a physical thing and go to a physical path. You're going to do something that either convinces the larger conscious system to give you a data stream doing that, or you're going to go get that data stream yourself through, or get it out of the database or something else. So you can't You can't do that. So that won't work. Nobody will ever make a machine that ends up in a physical place because the physical places don't exist.
We have machines that go places and we think they're real, like automobiles and airplanes and helicopters.
Sure, they can do that. They're all part of the simulation.
Right. So
and they have
could a time machine also become part of the simulation?
That's not going to happen that way unless we find ways that the rule set will support doing that, like a beam me down, Scotty, right? If you could get those rule sets to support it, then yes, you can do it.
Because we don't have a final rule set.
Well, we don't know all the rules, right? Science's job is to find what the rules are. So, yes, if you can get that within the rule set, then that might be done.
And the rules may be changing in any case.
Rules don't change much because they have defined this virtuality and it has evolved according to that rules here. And to change those rules would be very disruptive. That's policies like psi uncertainty principles, they can be changed easily. The rules are kind of embedded in our reality frame. If you change those rules, it's not that the system can't change rules. It can change whatever it pleases to change. It can change a rule, and from now on, it's going to be like this. We have a new rule. That's a possibility. If it turned out that helped people grow up, then it's a probability that it would happen because the system does what it thinks is going to be the best growth path for people. So, yes, those things are possible. But that's building a machine to teleport within this virtual reality. Now you want to teleport about something that was rendered a long time ago. It's not being rendered anymore. So all you can do is go into the database and see what it was like when it was rendered. But it doesn't exist as a place to go to. That's materialist thinking.
But it could be re-rendered if I wanted to.
It could be re-rendered. Sure. You can these virtual realities are good at that.
Yeah.
I once put on one of the headsets and sat in a special chair that would shake and something, and I went through the Apollo launch. And it was a Apollo, I can't remember what the mission was, but you'd sit there and, in Houston, it counted down and you could hear the roar of the engine and your chair would shake and the rumble had everything vibrating, and it was very, very realistic. Yeah. And it was about as much like being there as it could get, but it still was just another virtual reality inside this virtual reality. So it's not physical. Yeah. It's not physical. It's just experience. Now I experienced it, so now I can say I've had an experience of being in one of those big rockets and being blasted off. So I have that experience, but it's like that experience. It wasn't really that experience, but it was something very similar.
Let's take you for an example. You've been working on this theory for 30 plus years. Yeah. And longer than that. And you've come to the point of view that everything that we think of as physical, like this thing, it's really information based. But when you go about your day, you're awake, let's say 16 hours a day, are you thinking all the time that this is not physical, this is just information?
No, I interact with it. Yeah. As a physical thing. Yeah. I admire it, as a physical thing. And I wouldn't treat it any other way. But that's because I'm in this reality. Yeah. Okay, so I interact with this reality. The way it is, the way I see the reality isn't at all, none of this stuff is real. It is real to me. What's real is what you experience. What you experience is how you interpret the data. So reality is based on your interpretation of the data stream. I interpret this as a chunk of metal that has art and designs and faces and so on, and it's probably pretty heavy since it's metal. So, yes, I wouldn't dare drop that on my foot. It's and say, oh, well, it's a virtual reality. It's got a rule set. If I drop that, it's going to hurt. So, sure, I deal with everything as it is. And The whole point here is to deal with what happens and deal with it positively. That's the point. Which leads us into another interesting thing. People say, well, if you, or they want to do this, they want to get to the point that they can manipulate reality with their intention, to make it rain when they want it to rain, and sunshine, and be healthy, and all this stuff. And yes, you can do that, but if you do, you put yourself in a bubble of your own creation. Now, that bubble becomes a very plain vanilla bubble. No bad things hardly ever happen to you. You hardly ever get a flat tire. None of this stuff happens because you're living in this positive bubble of things being nice. And you can do that. But eventually, you have to let that go. You have to outgrow that. You don't want to make your life you don't want to make your life happening according to the way you'd like it to happen. You're interfering with why you're here. You're here to deal with whatever happens and make choices and they evolve. If you make your reality so agreeable that you don't have hardly any challenges, because everything kind of goes your way. Yeah, you get the promotion. Yeah, you get this job. And yeah, somebody gives you a new car. And yeah, you get whatever you need. But you're losing out now on making the choices. So people who really do grow up, they go through a phase where, wow, I can control this and I can control that. And if I get sick, I can heal myself. And they go through that. But then when they grow up a little more, they just let it all go. They stop doing any of that because they realize that what's important is to deal with what comes and deal with it well. That's where the learning is, not manipulating your reality to be the way you want it. That is a very false place to be. So, yes, I've done all these things paranormal. I've done them thousands of times. I've gotten to the point, out of body is a second. It's not something you sit down and have to do. You're just there. You let go of this data stream, you get that data stream. So all those things are like that, but I hardly ever do any of it on purpose. But I do a lot of it not on purpose, just because my mind, I say I run into you. And I say, well, okay, I'm going to meet with Jeffrey. What's he have in mind? So then I can go and I get all kinds of stuff, not because I'm looking for it or I put out a query, but just the question of, where's Jeffrey coming from? Just because it comes into my mind, because that's just a normal question to have in your mind. And here comes all the information back. So I don't need to make a query. And everybody's like this. It's not just me. You get all kinds of stuff as you need it. Not because you specifically are sitting down and getting into the right state and then putting out your query. That's what you did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. Now, your thoughts just bring in the answers automatically. And that means you live in a larger reality than what most people live in. So most people, they meet you, they have to talk to you a while, they have to get a sense of who you are, you have to ask you questions about what you're going to do with it, and all that sort of thing. So that takes a lot of time, and it's slow, and it doesn't give you the whole picture. But within, a few seconds, you can get that download, and everything's fine, but you didn't query the database. It's just because your mind had the question, you get the information. And life becomes you living in a larger reality where there's a lot more information. Remember we talked about decision space? Yeah. Well, when you're very high entropy, your decision space is very small. The more you grow up, the bigger that decision space gets. The number of choices you have, your understanding of things. And then the more you grow, the bigger that gets. So you just live in a bigger space. But what it looks like from other people looking at you, it looks like you're just easygoing, deal with things, you roll with the punches, you bend with the wind, and you're lucky. Just good things happen to you. You're kind of a lucky person. But they don't really see anybody who's unusual at all, because you're just being here, dealing with things you have to deal with. If you drop something and it lands on your foot, it'll break your foot, you're like everybody else. And if you got a broken foot, well, you'll limp around for a while, you're not just going to heal it and make it go away, because part of learning is don't drop things. If you got something heavy, you need to hold on to it. You need to be aware of it. You need to be focused on it. If you're a zombie going through life just on automatic all the time, then you're missing out on most of your life. So if you drop something on your foot, there's a lesson to be learned there, and the pain is a good teacher. So you accept that. You don't try to avoid it or fix it or let it go. So you start being and acting just like everybody else, because that's the game, and you just let that be the way it is. But the one thing that isn't like everybody else is that you live in a much larger reality with a much bigger database. And I mean a much bigger set of information.
Beautifully put. Earlier, you alluded to a communication that has been ongoing for a long time with a non-physical entity from the larger consciousness system. But then, you said we would talk about it, but then you indicated you'd rather not talk about these things.
Yeah, I don't talk about it very much, but I can say some things about it, but I won't say everything about it. There was an entity that came to me when I was 5 or 6, 7, I guess, not quite 5, but got me out of body, showed me how much fun it was, dealt with me as a child, and got me interested. And then I demanded to be able to do it myself, so it taught me, and it tried to scare me so that I wouldn't do it myself. So anyway, I did that. It sent me through a training course and then shut it off. And then later, that entity comes back. I start, I shouldn't say later. I always talked to that entity. As a teenager, one of the things I wrote in my book, I'm 14 years old, and I'm saying, well, am I ever going to have a girlfriend? And I get a thing. Yeah, there's a woman meant for you, but that'll be, 15 years from now or something. And I'm going, oh, no, 15 years. So, yes, I always had these entities that I could communicate with, and they would always give me very wise and very helpful information so I could kind of understand things. And that turns out that later that I found out it was always the same entity. That one, there were several here and several there, but the one was always consistent. And then when I got out to Monroe's and a lot of this stuff came back, like I told you before, yes. Then that entity also came back at that time. And it was the entity that I said was Thor. Remember I told you that I had this one fear test where this entity flashes of light and booms of thunder, and it was trying to see whether I would flinch or how I would react to that. And instead I laughed. I thought it was uproarious. Thor, and a big booming voice and all of that. And it just, I'd been out there and been in the non-physical a whole lot, so I knew that this was way over the top. So I laughed, and then and we renewed that relationship. And in talking with this entity, I realized that was the same entity that was teaching me to go out of body when I was 6 years old. And it had been around kind of a long time. So, yes, that if I have big questions, not little questions, it's not should I go this way, should I go to this movie or that movie, it's not that kind of stuff. It has to be big fundamental things that you want to know about life and so on. So I would ask that, and I'd always get good guidance. So you'd call them a guide, right? And that guide's still around. We still interact. I do. This is something I don't tell a lot of people, but, I kind of work for that guy. There were things that were going on here in this virtual reality that I could affect with my mind that I was given assignments to do. So I had that sort of thing going on, but I don't talk about that. But so it was just an interaction, and we kind of worked as a team to do things because him not having a body gave him constraints on what he could do here. You just can't meddle with things. That's not allowed. There's rules about that. So I'm here. I can meddle with things because I'm a part of it. You see, because I'm limited. So then I also can do things. So we would work together as a team with me here and him there. He has much bigger picture than I do, and I have some abilities that I can do here that he can't do because he's not embodied here. And anyway, so yes, we would work at things. And that would come and go. There may be years where we didn't interact much, and other times when it would interact maybe intensively for a while. And so that's a thing I've been with, an interaction I've been with a very long time.
So would you say that Thor, can I call him Thor?
You can, that's my joke.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a joke that he came on that way just to...
That may not be, does he have another name?
Yeah, there are other names. I asked him, I said, mostly when you get with people who are non-physical, they almost don't relate to the name thing. It's like, name? Why would I need a name? You interact with people by just knowing them. You feel their energy. You know who they are. It's intuitive. It's not, you don't need a name. You only need a name here in this space because that labels people. But there, the knowing is such that names are irrelevant. But anyway, so I did ask him a long, long time ago, 20, 30 years ago. I said, well, what name do you really go by? Thor's a joke, okay. Mm-hmm. But he said, Hanoi Jung. Hanoi, no, not Hanoi, but Hanoi Jung, he said, was a favorite of mine. He'd been here many times in a body. He said, that one was a favorite of mine. Mm-hmm. So then I used that a little bit, but mainly I don't use any names. Names are irrelevant. I just think of him, and then we got a connection. So
So this entity is one who has been here in this physical plane many times and is currently elsewhere.
Yes. Yeah. So that's true. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so we have worked together as a team. He's available anytime I want. All I have to do is think of him, and he's there. Mm-hmm. I don't think of him very often because that would be abusive. He's not here just to answer my questions. He's got his own things to do. So I don't chat with him often anymore because I've come to a place where I pretty much know the answers to the questions. And no, he did not help me put this theory together. I had to do that entirely myself. Mm. And that's because if I was going to explain it, I had to earn it. I had to figure it out. Mm-hmm. If it was something somebody told me, I'd only be able to regurgitate that, and I really wouldn't own it. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't get any help with putting it together. Well, I shouldn't say that. I probably did get help, but not help that I was aware of. It wasn't direct help. I may have gotten some.
Not like a conscious collaboration.
No, it wasn't that. I never got, this reality is only information. I never got that. I had to figure that out painfully, like you figure out everything. It takes a lot of trial and error and so on before you hit something that really works. So no, I had to figure it all out on my own because it had to be mine so that I could really explain it, not from what I was told, because that would be a very empty explanation. I wouldn't be able to really explain it if I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. So no, none of my theory was dictated to me. None of it is, instant writing or, channeling or anything like that.
According to your model, where would this entity, maybe where isn't the right word, but what is the status of such an entity that is part of the larger consciousness system but not physical?
Well, this particular entity has a job, and that job has to do with maintaining, what can we say, not order, but seeing that the rules aren't disobeyed. There's some big rules, too. There are multiple reality frames, and there's rules about sharing between those reality frames and so on. So whenever you have rules, you need somebody that will enforce the rules or at least keep track of the rules. So there is a very flat hierarchy here in the non-physical.
Flat
hierarchy. In other words, hierarchy is not deep, but an organization that has a flat.
Not like there's infinitely many levels.
Right. It's not like all this levels.
Millions of levels.
There's like the larger conscious system, and then there's this other level.
Yeah.
And this level with this guy works is basically to see that the rules are maintained and obeyed in this system plus several others.
Yeah.
So he kind of has a job in the non-physical with the LCS.
The idea of a job, though, does suggest that you have a supervisor.
Yeah, well, the top guy is the LCS.
Uh-huh.
All right, that's the top guy. But he he will be able to see things and understand everything that he wants, but not all at once. He's a conscious like us. To get this information, I got to look over there and focus on that.
Yeah.
So even the larger conscious system has to focus. Well, he's got a big focus, but it's not just omniscience that I know everything always. It's I have to focus on this and that. So he has some underlings that focus on various big pieces to see that there's not any really big problems coming up.
Mm-hmm.
A problem would be if a reality, say, is starting to go negative to the point that it's going to snowball into, dog eat dog at the bottom.
Yeah.
End up with the law of the jungle, like kind of where we started. And it's gone this way, but it looks like it might go that way. Well, then they'll want to look at it and say, well, what can we do to help this thing grow and avoid that? Is there anything we can do from out in the margins with plausible deniability that will actually help this succeed? So that sort of thing needs to be noticed. So it has some underlings that help look at various things and make sure the interaction between frames is kind of only done when allowed. You don't want things doing this because each one of these reality frames is a kind of a set that's evolved from now, and to suddenly have other things dropping into it, it would just cause a lot of chaos and fear. So you have rules about, now I can go to other reality frames, but you have to obey certain rules. There's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do.
Right.
And if you're going to get into that frame as a physical being in that frame, you can only do that if the rendering engine of that puts you in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be on a good relationship with the system to do that. You can't just pop in there with the body because the body is not yours to pop in. It's rendered.
Mm.
But you can listen and you can speak, but not physically, just mind to mind. So you can communicate mind to mind to those beings if they want to communicate with you and if they're sensitive enough to notice and so on. So a lot of times you try to communicate and they just ignore you because they're not at a place where they can do that mind-to-mind thing yet. But anyway, you can interact some ways, but it's limited. So there are rules about what you can do. And wherever there's rules, there needs to be somebody seeing that the rules aren't violated in any big way. So he has a job that, and he's been through the Earth cycle many times. So he now got a promotion, I guess.
You indicated to me in an earlier interview that you thought that this incarnation, developing and sharing this theory with the world, was something that you had agreed to do prior to your birth.
Yeah, it wasn't so much agreed to do. It's not the right phrase, but it's close. Mm-hmm. If I go back to the last, which I generally don't bother with past lives, so what good? How's that going to help me grow up? Not so much. So I did look back at the last couple, and I realized that I was really being prepared for what I'm doing now. I was in a position that was trying to help people see bigger pictures in a different time and space within a different context. Mm-hmm. And as I looked at it, I said, oh, that was me being schooled, being prepared for what I'm doing here. And the understanding, the things that happened to me in my out-of-body sessions, I've often met by entities that would help me understand things and so on. So they were very productive in helping me understand bigger pictures. The larger conscious system basically gave me a tour of reality. And, when you go out of body, you have to have an address. You have to say what it is you want to do. Or you can wild card. Whatever. Take me where you think I'll learn something. And the system and I got in a thing where, it's like I'd understand about reality frames, multiple reality frames. And I'd say, I just want to experience some reality frames. So I'd get experience in reality frames. I'd like to experience having a body in one of these other things. And I read the rules and I get a body and so on. So the system has gone out of its way to give me a lot of experience in the nature of this reality, just so I would be I could more easily understand it as a whole. So that's been happening throughout my life. I've been taken places, shown things. One time I was taken to a thing I call the done reality, and that's where people who individuate units of consciousness who think they're done, they're enlightened, they're done, and when it comes time, where would you like to incarnate next? And they say, next, I don't have a next, I'm done. And of course, that's generally not true, or they wouldn't be saying that. If they were really done, they wouldn't have that attitude. But anyway, so nobody's ever forced to do anything. So if they say, no, I'm done now, I don't need that anymore, I want to progress to the next level, well, they go to this reality I call the done reality, because everybody there was done. And this was funny because I got sent there, and it's like, what is this place? What am I supposed to learn here? Because I need to learn something here. It says, what's the lesson? What am I supposed to learn? And I'd go back, and I wasn't getting it. In general, the people there were polite. They were nice. They were mostly very intelligent. But then eventually I started seeing that they were also cliquish. And there were this group who thought that they were more done than that other group. And I saw that starting to form up that way. And then I'd come back time would go by, and I'd come back and I'd find that clique was even more so like that. And then I realized that there was other divisions amongst the people who were done. And generally they were all nice and polite, but there was ego starting to creep in. There was some fear starting to creep in. What are those people going to do, and how is that going to affect us? So some fear was creeping in. And then I realized what the lesson was. These are the done people. These are the people who are very highly evolved. But they also still had a big wad of ego because they were proud of being evolved. They had no humility, and they were, in their own minds, they had gone as far as anyone could go, which was not true, but it's what they thought. And they started to de-evolve. They'd get in this place, and pretty soon they were very high-quality entities, yes, but they got here and they started to de-evolve. They started to build their egos, started to come up, and their fears started to grow, and they started to get into cliques that didn't like each other and thought badly of each other, that had negative feelings, and this whole thing started to degrade. And then I noticed that some of them, they would just wink out and go. And I would follow them, and what they did is they realized what had happened. They realized that they were de-evolving, and they went back and said, okay, I need to go again. Give me another incarnation. I'm not done. So they would then return. But these other people would stay there until they realized that they were de-evolving, and then they would go back.
So when you say stay there, I gather you're referring to what the Tibetans called the Bardo planes.
Well, no, I don't know. It's just another virtual reality. Just another virtual reality. This virtual reality was a place where the people who were done.
So what we think of as heaven is a virtual reality.
Yes. There are lots of virtual realities. The dream reality is a virtual reality. This reality is a virtual reality. Your daydreams are virtual realities. There's all sorts of virtual realities. All the spaces you get to in the outer body. You meet these people, you go to places, they're all just virtual. It's all information. It's all just information that you get to experience. Okay, so in this done reality, I finally got it, and after I got what was going on, then I didn't go back there anymore. So I'd go until I learned a lesson, and then the lesson would be over, and I didn't return. But I could return to any of them, because once you have an address in your mind, you can make an intent to go back there. So then they were all available to me, but I didn't really go because there wasn't any point. I had learned that. So these people were de-evolving. Some of them got it. Some of them left that still hadn't gotten it, and they, like I say, were nice. They were polite, but they also were arrogant. And they didn't have humility. They were too full of themselves, too proud of themselves for having become enlightened. So that was the done reality. So it's just a virtual reality. And what it is a space in which they could experience. And mainly what they experienced there is each other. So it was like a social club that they were in. And they experienced each other. It's not like they sat down and ate meals or anything. They just socialized and connected.
You've described that sort of situation as a chat room in the past.
Yeah, it was sort of like a chat room, but they had shapes. They see each other as individuals, and they had shapes. I didn't ever see anybody cooking food or anything like that. They just seemed to mingle and interact. It was like a social space, but it was with bodies. It wasn't just disembodied stuff in a chat room. It was kind of a chat room with bodies, yes. But all of these people were like that. They were all self-pronounced as being enlightened. And had all said, no, I don't want to go back. I'm done. Because they were convinced that they had gone as far as anyone could go. So that's where they ended up. So they ended up in this social space where they interacted with other people who were done. And it was an interesting learning thing. And I realized that humility was part of being done. It wasn't just lowering your entropy and being really proud of it. It was lowering your entropy and being of service to other people.
You have had this guide or helper who was taking you to these various spaces for your own benefit.
Yeah, actually, that wasn't the guide taking me there. That was the LCS. Was just sending me to these places. And
without a guide.
Yeah, without a guide, right. I was there. And if I got it right away, what I was supposed to learn, then that'd usually be just a one trip. But if I didn't get it, I may have 5 or 6 or 10 trips. And what would happen is that I'd go to bed at night, I'd relax, I'd fall asleep, and I was there. Oh, here again. All right, now why am I here? Let me chat with these people. Well, they're mostly very lovely people. They're nice, they're polite, they're sociable, they're friendly. And they also were in the process of de-evolving. And I learned something then about the bigger system, is that we evolve by lowering our entropy. To lower entropy takes effort, takes work. If you stop working, your entropy just naturally starts to increase. That's just the nature of entropy. You have to put work in to lower entropy. If you let it go, it de-evolves. The entropy starts to go up by itself. And these people had gotten to a low entropy, but then quit. And when you quit, you're no longer putting effort in. You're no longer trying to help, trying to be of service. Then entropy starts to grow. And it just naturally does that because that's the way entropy works.
Entropy is sort of like gravity, I gather.
Well, in as much as it's just a rule, but to lower entropy takes effort. You don't just lower your entropy because you want to or you think it's a good idea. You actually have to change.
Well, what I recall having learned somewhere along the way is that everything would dissipate by itself if left alone. The only reason that we have evolution, for example, on this planet, which is considered a lowering of entropy, a greater complexification of the world, is because we're getting energy from the sun.
Right. That is called the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy in the universe increases naturally.
It's as if the prime directive of the larger consciousness system in your theory is the lowering of entropy, whether it's in this simulation or any other simulation.
Yes, lowering of entropy is a very fundamental concept. If you look at our biological evolution, it's basically about lowering entropy. Systems get more complex. They go from single-celled to multi-celled cooperation. Remember, it's all about cooperation. To multi-celled things with specialization. They have organs now, and then they get to the point that they're like us, trillions of cells, all cooperating to make a single thing. And with that with that complexity comes flexibility. When you have that much complexity, you can do this or do that. You have choice. You have a whole lot more things that you can do. You have a bigger decision space. So it's the way things evolve. But to lower entropy takes effort, takes work. You have to do something. And intention is how we do work. We, as consciousness, it has to do with our intent. So if your intention moves you toward lower entropy, then you're moving toward being kind to other people, caring, trying to help, all those positive things. And when you do that, your life is joyful and happy and you feel satisfied. So that's the lowering your entropy, but that takes effort. A person, to lower their entropy, has to change who they are. It's not an intellectual thing. You can read all about it and understand it intellectually, but that won't make you a better person. You have to actually be a better person. And to do that, you have to change who you are. That's why it's so slow. Evolution is relentless, but it's also very, very slow. It's not an easy thing to change who you are.
Well, do you think there is an end goal? Like in theology, there's this whole branch, eschatology, looking at the final stage, the second coming of Christ or something along those lines.
No, and some of the Buddhist sects, and they have a lot of sects just like the Christians do, a lot of different kinds of Buddhists. But in some of them, they have this idea that you become enlightened, you get to the point where you've grown up as much as you can grow, and then you return to the Godhead. So you just become one with all that is, or one with the larger conscious system or something. And I think that is not the way it works. I disagree with that. It's contrary to my theory in several ways. One is the larger conscious system broke itself into pieces, so it would interact with those pieces. So going back into the Godhead is like reversing the process. And you might think, well, the pieces were out to grow up, and as they grow up, then you don't need them anymore. They come back. But you can always help. There's always something that you can do to be helpful. It's like you never run out of ways to be helpful. So this idea that I'm done, I quit, I'm perfect now, is hubris. It's not really it's not an endpoint that we're going to. You look at the system, okay, with its just around us here, it has this 9 billion players in the game, okay, 9 billion avatars and probably closely 9 billion individuated units of consciousness playing those avatars. The possibilities are enormous. What could we become if we were all caring? What could we become if we all understood the larger system? We could access each other's minds. We could get our minds together. You can get 10 people, and if they're all equally capable of healing, 10 of them together will heal 10 times as much because it's additive. What would 9 billion people do, all working together to heal and to grow and do things? It boggles the imagination what we could become, you know, just within this group. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that there's an end to that growth, not a practical end. There may be a theoretical end, but I don't see a practical end to that, because the more you grow up, the more choices you have. The more choices you have are the more ways that you can grow. So it's like this growing thing isn't narrowing down to nothing else to do. It's going the other way. It's expanding out to more and more that you can do. All right, now you're a junior wizard and you can read minds and you can help people and see their difficulties, and you know when and how to be kind and when to be tough love, and you understand all of this. Well, that makes you just a better teacher. So then you become a better and better teacher, a better, more efficient helper, and then you're done. Why would you be done? You've just gotten more and more effective. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to train more teachers. Mm-hmm. You're going to help people see. You're going to be whatever you can be to help the whole system evolve and grow. So the possibilities open up as it grows. Mm-hmm. And the only way the system would stop is if it had explored every possibility. And we are so far away from exploring every possibility that I see that as, for the foreseeable future, there's going to be places to help, ways to improve, things to do. And most people who feel like they're enlightened don't realize how far yet they have to go. It's that thing that you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know the ways that you could improve yourself, so you think you're as improved as you can possibly be. But that's not likely. The more you really understand, the more you realize that you know very little.
So your model in this regard seems very much like the Buddhist idea of the Bodhisattva, that you achieve a measure of enlightenment, but you always go back to help others.
Yeah, I think that's the case. This idea of I'm done, that to me sounds very self-centered. Mm-hmm. I'm getting out of this hellhole, this place where all these people fight all the time, I'm getting out of this misery and grief and so on. I'm getting off this wheel of sorrow or... Anyway, that's self-centered. I'm getting out, So, well, it's not about you. It's about what you have to offer, how much you can serve. That's what it's about. And in that case, you never want out. You always want to go back and help and learn so you can be more help. And it's just that way. When you start the cycle of growing up, all you need to do is get in, get some experience, get out, go in. You're not very specific about anything. It's just getting experience and growing. Then you get to the point where you want specific experience to work on problems and issues that you have to grow up better. And then you get into where you're a teacher. You start helping other people grow up. And then you get to be a better teacher where you understand it at a deeper level, and then you help other people. So I don't see any end to that. It seems to me that could we use, another 10,000 people on this planet who are all about love and helping other people? Sure, Could we use another million one of those? Yeah, sure. We need as many of them as we can get. It's not like, well, they got plenty, let them struggle. There's always room for you to grow and understand. And if you stop working on it, if you stop trying, if you stop serving, you will start to de-evolve until the point where now you got to go back in and catch up to where you were. So the whole thing to me is endless and will keep on chugging, because let's say that we humans all pull together as almost one consciousness where we're all together, we're all beings of love and so on. Well, all never happens, but the majority of us are. And with all of our minds together, we can go explore the cosmos at the speed of light. More than the speed of light. Speed of light's slow compared to the speed of consciousness. So we can explore all there is to explore. And with a mind very powerful, all of us together. Well, now, would the system then introduce us to people in other galaxies that now we'd have to learn how to get along with and not to fight with, to accept, even though they look like big crocodiles or have 6 heads or something. Would that be the next challenge? Well, it could do that. It could just create that. It's all it is a virtual reality. All it has to do is put that in the data stream. And there we are having to deal with now the next galaxy or the next galaxy after that, and have all those people come together in one kind of thing from throughout the galaxy, throughout all the galaxies. So I can see that there's really no end in it. It's a virtual reality. Another galaxy full of people is just another bunch of data in the database.
Well, if this is all, as you propose, the work of the larger consciousness system, then I've often thought that what that one consciousness desires is to have every possible experience, to know every possibility of conscious experience, which would require, trillions of planets and many different life forms and bodies and so on.
So I say that I don't see an end, you see. I see that it's not like, well, it's going to know everything there is to know and it's stuck. I don't see that happening. It just scales. It just keeps scaling, and I don't see there's an end. For that matter, there are other virtual realities, sort of like ours, and they could use some enlightened people to come help out too. So even if Earth gets to the point that it is largely low entropy, there's other places that are not, and your services would be needed there. So I don't really see an end to it. Yes, you can always scale it up as long as the system has the capacity and the ability to scale it up. So it's maybe limited by the fact that the system's finite. Maybe. But then it can start collecting a lot of that data that's really, really old and putting it back into use again. It's just going to find efficiencies elsewhere. So,
even a finite system can have virtually infinite possibilities.
Virtually infinite possibilities, but not infinite possibilities. But, that's a relative thing.
Such a large number, it hardly matters.
Exactly. It's like if you're in an inner tube, a regular tire inner tube, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the ocean seems infinite to you. Days and days and weeks go by, and it all looks the same. Just water everywhere you can see. So you'd come to the conclusion that the Atlantic Ocean was infinite. It's all in the perspective. Things look infinite to us because they're so big that it boggles our mind and we can't even conceive of it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's really infinite. It just means it's really, really big. And I think that's the same with the larger consciousness system. It doesn't need to be infinite. I think it has room to expand. And I don't see that there's any stopping point to that. You can do the same thing that we people have to do with each other, which is accept each other, learn to care for each other. You can do that with the people in the next galaxy, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. And after you've done your whole galactic cluster, you can do it with the next cluster. And I don't see that there's really an end to it. How big is the universe? Well, it's as big as a computer wants to make it. Right? It's just as big as a computer wants to make it. It's a vector. In a 3-space, 3 orthogonal unit vectors define space from plus infinity to minus infinity in all directions. Yeah. So that's how big it is. It's you can make it any size you need. So I don't see, even just in this virtual reality, that you run into an end. Mm-hmm. This virtual reality can grow, much less the combining of virtual realities. Maybe that would be a thing. There's just so many options and so many ways to grow that, no, I don't think you come to an end where you've done everything that could be done, experienced everything that you could possibly experience. I think that just goes on and on and on as we evolve, become, again, more cooperative, more caring with each other on a cellular level, on a human-to-human level, on a galaxy-to-galaxy level, whatever. We just keep evolving the quality of our consciousness. And once you have a high quality, you got to keep working to keep it there. You can't sit back and say you're done. Once that happens, you start to go backwards. So it's a great system. It's a very benevolent system. It's it goes out of its way to help you evolve if you're really seriously trying to. Things will just work out to your favor. You'll learn what you need to learn. You'll run into the people you need to run into. You'll read the books that you need to read. All that will just happen in time. And yes, some incarnations may be failures. You maybe didn't do so well, but that's not a big deal. It's not unless you have a whole lot of them in a row that it becomes a big deal. And then the system puts the basket down, like we discussed before. It puts you in a situation where you can succeed, where it's very hard not to succeed. And then that builds up some confidence, and then they make it a little harder and a little harder. And pretty soon you're back in the game, back up to where you were and moving forward. So there's no permanent failure. There's only temporary failure. There's no permanent paradise. You have to always earn your way by making good choices and caring. And there's no place where the losers all congregate, and fight with each other. They are put back in the game and built up to the point where they can get back into it. So the system is a very benevolent, a very positive system because it's evolving itself. It's learned to become love. And the simple fact is that if it's a social system, if it's interactive, it's not just one monolithic thing, then caring and cooperating and becoming love optimizes that duo. If you're on an island all by yourself, you can do whatever you please, whenever you please. Just you. You can be as self-centered as you want, and it's fine. It doesn't hurt anybody else. Another person ends up on that island with you. Now you have to consider that other person. Mm-hmm. You see, now it's a social system, and caring, cooperation, and all of those things are necessary to optimize the two of you being there together. If you fight, then you're worse off than you were when you were by yourself. You've gone backwards. So that's the social system aspect of it. When the system broke itself into pieces, you see why it had to do that. That was its step to give itself more possibilities.
Well, you've put together a theory that combines physics and computer science and Buddhist spirituality and probably other forms of spirituality, along with a sense of ethics and metaphysics and probably sociology as well. It's very comprehensive, I have to say.
I didn't start out to do that. It just happened. I started out just to understand the paranormal, understand consciousness, because I had these experiences. I had non-physical friends. I had out-of-bodies and mind-to-mind and healing, and I did all those things, but I didn't have any idea how they really worked. And I'm a physicist. I want to understand the nature of reality. That's my passion. So I just worked at it, and eventually I got to the point it was like, gee whiz, holy cow, I've got something that explains quantum physics, explains relativity, explains the physical world. It's a better physics. It's a more complete physics. And at the same time, I've got this understanding of the subjective world. It's all about fear. It's all about, the quality of your consciousness. If you're unhappy and miserable and so on, there's a reason for it. It's not just you have bad luck. There's a reason for it. You're making poor choices. You're seeing the world through what you don't have as opposed to what you do have. You're being negative and complaining when you actually are probably better off than most of the other people on the planet. It's this sort of thing. It's your problems are all internal. It's not the external world that is hurting you. It's the internal world that is defining your degree of joy or your degree of upset and angry and unhappy. It's all inside. That's where the changes have to make. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you do that by really, really wanting to.
How much of this theory was something that just seemed logically essential, and how much of it do you think came from For example, a few minutes ago, you were describing how reincarnation works. And I think you said something to the effect, after so many lifetimes of bad experiences, you'll be given some help so that your confidence will return. Was that a logical conclusion, or is that something you experienced directly?
That was some of both. It was a combination of both of those things. Mostly my sense of how this world works and the nature of reality and the paranormal and all of that, I just noodled out by logic. I'm a scientist. That's what I do. I try to find logical systems, a system of logic that explains all the data. I had lots of data. I had the paranormal data. I had the physics data. I needed to understand an overarching thing that explained both of them. So I worked toward that until it started to fall into place. But this didn't all happen overnight. You're talking about, I've been doing this for 50 years. I'm 80 now. I was seriously doing this in my 20s. So, it's been a long, long time. And I would experience things which gave me the way it worked, not why it worked. And then I needed to figure out why it worked. So some of it was me noodling out why it worked that way, how it worked that way, to explain all the details. Like, how is it sometimes you're really good at remote viewing and sometimes you're really terrible at it? Why? If it's something you know how to do, why don't you just do it? Well, there's reasons why you're good sometimes, you're not good other times, and you have to understand everything.
The reason being, to reiterate, I think what you already said, is the probabilistic nature of reality.
That is part of it, but the part that makes it so uncertain for most people is they are not that stable within their consciousness. Sometimes they're on the spot, they're relaxed, they're confident, they don't have any problems going on in their head, so it's easy. They can get there, they get good answers, and everything seems to work, and they feel good, they feel confident. One success, kind of bolsters the next success. And then there's another time when it doesn't work because they had too much sugar. Their mind's a little bit confused, so they don't do as well. So then they lose some confidence because they got a bunch of it wrong, and now they're not sure about it. And then it goes worse, and it gets worse. And, it has to do with the person and their mind and the stability of that consciousness. Can it remain calm and centered, confident, and not have a lot of stray noise going on in its mind? That takes practice. You're not born that way. That takes practice to develop that. So it takes time. And your life is not this perfect stream of wonderfulness all the time. There's ups and downs and trauma in everybody's life. And if your life is particularly taxing, you're probably not so good at your remote viewing during those times because you're distracted and your mind jumps off to other things that are going on. There's so many variables within consciousness that to get all these aligned just at the right time and the right way is difficult. And that's why people will say, well, I had a spontaneous out of body and it just happened. And then the next week I had another one. And that was 20 years ago and I haven't had one since. These things just happen. And that's because all of those things were there, but they didn't all align and come together until just this one moment when you were sitting down and you were relaxed and you were calm and you were confident and everything in your life was okay. And then, bang, things happen. And then it's, oh my God, look at that, that happened. I'm going to try to do it again. Well, now you've just ruined it because now you're trying to do it. You have to let it happen. You can't force it to happen. Trying to force it and make it happen just keeps it from happening. So the people are their own worst enemy. It's not you have to learn something new. You just have to let go of a lot of old junk to actually get there. But eventually it gets easier and easier and easier, and then it happens, it's trivial. And you don't have to go through processes, and it doesn't matter how relaxed you are, and it doesn't matter if your life is really in a tumble. You can do it anyway. And you practice things enough that you get good at it, and then you realize that you can broaden it. Maybe you're just good at talking to dead people. You're a medium and you talk to dead people, and you're really good at that, but you're not so good at anything else. You're not good at remote viewing, or you're not good at other things. Well, you can be. You're good at talking to dead people because you've worked on that for a long time. It's been part of your life for probably 20, 30 years. You're good at it. And there's some reason why you're good at it. For most people, the reason they get good at it is because they had a very traumatic childhood. And their childhood was so unhappy and traumatic that they escaped through their intuitive side. The intellect was a nasty place where they had to live. But on their intuitive side and in their imagination, they could go off and make friends with nice people. They could live in a pretty world where things were better. They could explore, and they weren't constantly running into like they did in this world. So people with traumatic childhoods end up with capabilities in the paranormal realm that just happened there because as children, they got into that paranormal, and it became normal for them. Talking to entities, sure, I do it all the time. So another reason is, we see about the kids that have autism. Well, an autistic child, their intellectual side, their interaction with the world from that intellectual side is broken. It just doesn't work. That process is damaged. So what's left? The intuitive side. So what do? They start playing and working with that intuitive side, and pretty soon you got autistic kids can read your mind, autistic kids that can give you the square root of 9,862 in less than a second. Autistic kids that can do all these amazing things because they were forced to develop their intuitive side. Well, everybody can develop their intuitive side if they want to. It's just they were pushed to do that, so they do it at a young age, and young enough when they don't know that all these things they're doing are impossible. When you're 6 years old, you don't know that anything's impossible. Everything's magic in your life. You get in an automobile and it makes noise and you go places. That's impossible. How does that happen? They don't know. Life is full of magic. So they can do the cube root of some 8-digit number just like that because they're not actually mathematically doing it. They're just seeing the numbers come out in front of them, and they're just reading them off as they appear. They're getting the answer out of the database. So, yes, everybody can do these things. Some people do them naturally because of a traumatic childhood, or because they're autistic, or just because they're interested and they start working on it. And they start practicing. And they practice and they practice, and then they learn and they grow, and then they find themselves doing these paranormal things. Opens up their reality. They realize reality isn't just this small space that everybody else thinks. There's this bigger space, and they can function in that bigger space. And they realize that. And then they realize that they're a very small thing in a very big world, all of which they don't understand. And they gain some humility. And then they start to see a bigger world. Then they integrate these two worlds together, the logical world and the intuitive world. And they start to get data from what that person's problem is so that they're better at helping them solve it. And it just grows. So that's the path that you end up doing these things. But it's not easy, in that you just don't get there because you read about it in a book. You got to change who you are. You have to change yourself. And that is hard for most people to do. You have to get over your fear, get over your ego, get over your beliefs, and just be. And when you can just be, lots of things become possible that were impossible before. So we can do this, We are a piece of consciousness. We can explore everything that's in consciousness. It's part of what we can do. But we are limited. This free will awareness unit is limited to playing by the rules in the rule set and making these tough choices that come to the avatars in this rule set. And by that, they level up. So that's the name of the game. So yes, my model got to reincarnation, which I called new experience packets, because I like to distance myself from religion, because religion suddenly brings up a lot of claps and a lot of boos, and people have a lot of preconceived notions about it, so I try to avoid those preconceived notions. But I came to this idea not because I thought it was a good idea or that the Buddhists like it and I like the Buddhists or something like that. It was logically necessary for the model. Learning is a serial process. You have to learn about A before you can start learning about B. It's a serial process of growing up.
Yeah.
So in a serial process, you have to take one step at a time. And if what you're doing is changing yourself, that's a tough thing to do. You're going to need a lot of lifetimes to do that in the process. So reincarnation became a logical necessity of this. Not, it was, my model is a logical model. There's logic of why all the piece parts are and how they work and why they work that way. And then it was just pure serendipity that I could explain all these things in physics and metaphysics and philosophy because of it. I didn't start out trying to find...
So you're saying reincarnation is logically necessary so that the individual can become more and more complex or have
lower entropy.
Lower entropy. But if you were to view it as sociological, if you view it as the collection of humanity, if some people die and they're just dead, other people still benefit from what they've done. Society as a whole evolved.
Sure it does. This is a collective. We're all in this boat together.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say that, you look at the world today and that's us. That's the way we are.
But the larger consciousness might function perfectly well without reincarnation.
Well, you have a lifetime, right? You have to live by the rule set.
Yeah.
It's not really the larger conscious system's choice. It started this virtual reality with a rule set and initial conditions.
Yeah.
And as it evolved, it's got rules. And one of the rules are that things wear out. Everything has a shelf life.
Right.
Things wear out, things grow old, things die.
Entropy.
That's entropy, right? That's part of the system.
Yeah.
It's the way it works. So if the avatars are gonna die, then you're going to need to get another avatar. Just like when you play the game. If you play World of Warcraft and you only get one lifetime, nobody would ever join that game. It wouldn't be any fun because you'd only last for the first 5 minutes because you don't know how to play yet.
Yeah.
You're stupid in the game. You don't do the right things. You don't know where to hide. You don't know how to find food.
Mm-hmm.
So you die and you get another one. But now you're smarter. You have to fish first, and that'll keep you alive. And then you die. But this time you lasted 10 minutes. And then, but you keep going back and playing the game because it's fun, because you keep learning. You're learning where the things are to avoid, where the things are you need to go, how to collect those coins, and what's the best things to buy with those coins. And it's this learning process, and you level up. Pretty soon you're a level 40 or level 60 or something, and now you got all this power. And anyway, it's like that. A game that gives you one shot, you're done, is a boring game. It's not going to work. This is a game where it's difficult to learn. You have to change who you are, is the name of the game. And if changing who you are, if you start with a fearful person, is a hard thing to do. You're afraid of change. You don't want to change. What if I changed myself? What if I found out the authentic me was a jerk? I'd rather just have my persona that I give to the world because I'm safe. I do that now and it works. Mm-hmm. If I just let myself be authentic, would it work? Or would I go backwards? Well, people are afraid. They're not going to change. They're afraid to change. So we're in this system. We need reincarnation. The system's stuck with it because that's what evolved. Things die because entropy is the way it is. All things have a shelf life. Even a chunk of steel. You can take a steel ingot and set it here. If you wait long enough, it'll evaporate.
Well, would you say the individuated units of consciousness have an endpoint, or do they just continue on?
They just continue growing.
Mm-hmm.
They continue evolving. They continue growing, and they go from in and out to specific things, to being helpful, to being teachers, to being better teachers, to being good examples, all of these things. And they just come back and contribute. and contribute and contribute. And if this reality doesn't have much more to contribute to, there's another one that needs some contributions. So you just don't run out of things to contribute to. Yes, so the reincarnation means you just keep growing and evolving and helping and being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That's what it's all about. That doesn't have a termination. The system can't just say, well, let's let all these avatars live forever. Well, that doesn't work very well because, as you get older, you get more set in your ways, particularly if you're not very grown up and you get this been there, done that attitude. Your growth rate slows down and you're just making tiny, tiny steps if you're making any progress at all. Whereas you recycle, you come back in and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and you're ready to grab that world and do something with it. And that's good. So you start fresh. You don't have memory. All you have is the quality that you've earned, and now you got to figure it all out and make good choices from here on. So it's a challenge. If you fail a lot in a row, you'll get an easier thing. It won't be so challenging. If you're really good and you make real big successes, you'll get a harder challenge next time.
Do you encourage people to do the sorts of things you did, like cultivate out-of-body experiences?
Well, what I tell them is the paranormal in and of itself has really no value. There's no real value in it. But it does have a value as an exercise. So lifting weights and setting them down again really intrinsically has no value. In a sense, you're just moving something from here to there and here to there, and you just repeat that, and the whole world is not a better place because that weight went up and down a bunch of times.
No, but your biceps might be
something. You learn from it, right? So this is the same way. You learn from the paranormal several things. One, in order to do it well, you have to discipline your mind. You have to get rid of this constant chatter. You have to have a better diet. You have to be healthy. If you have a lot of pains and aches, then it's going to get in the way. So you have to grow some to just get there, to even start. You have to take your consciousness seriously. So you don't drink psychotropics. You don't take in drugs that are constantly confusing you and sending you around. You start to clean up your life. You get focused, and you start to become more humble as you realize that life is a lot bigger than you thought, and that there's a point to it. There's more dimensions, more reality, more things going on there, and you have opportunities to help there as well. And like I say, young men, right, all they do when they first get out of body is fight, because that's where they are. They're fighting evil. They take their sword of truth and they go out and do fighting with the bad guys, and they chop the bad guys up, and they feel good about that, and that's where they are in their evolution. Their idea, the way good wins is because it kills evil. And that's not the right attitude. But eventually they outgrow that, and then they stop doing that, and they start doing things that are different than just martial arts. But it's a growing thing, and then they start seeing a bigger picture, and they can look back and say, oh, I remember when it was all about chop, chop, chop. Yeah, that's the way I was then, and now I see a bigger picture. It's not that at all. It's about me growing up. It's about the choices I make. Do I make choices to fight, or do I find other ways to solve problems? Are there other ways to solve problems, and can I find them? And if I try them, how do they work? So it helps you find some humility, that you're a small thing in a much bigger picture. It helps you find purpose. Oh, lower entry, grow up. Yeah, there's a lot of purpose here. If you're the materialist, you don't have any of that. There's no purpose. You're just here because you're here. You do whatever you do, and then you're gone, and that's the end of it. There's no really reason to do anything other than make yourself comfortable and have as much fun as you can. And you try doing that, and it doesn't make you happy. You drink as much beer as you can, you have as many parties as you can, and you're not happy. There's something missing in your life. And then you find out that the missing stuff is the stuff you're starting to get connected to when you start doing these paranormal things. So the paranormal things themselves, to go out of body, to be able to mind-to-mind communicate, to remote view, by themselves, they're irrelevant. But as teaching tools, they're excellent because I see them like the pretty flower that attracts the bee. Mm-hmm. Oh, power. I'd like to be able to remote view and see what's going on. Gee, I could remote view the girls' locker room. Wow, that would be great. All right. So you go into it because the flower is attractive. It's power. But when you get there and you start to learn, what you learn is humility. And what you learn is that there's a world where right and wrong really makes a lot of difference. And you don't progress, you don't level up until you get there. You may be in the chop martial arts phase for 20 years until you grow up, or maybe your whole life and you never grow out of that. Maybe the next time you'll grow out of it. But when you do grow out of it, then it's like, oh, I see. It's not really about just fighting to vanquish the bad guys, because there's always another bad guy. You know, it's like you get this bad guy and there's another bad guy. You get that. There's something wrong here with the story. You know, this is not working out. There's an endless supply of bad guys. So what else? You know, try something else. So you get bigger pictures. You get humility. You start to grow. You realize what the significance is. You realize that, yes, you can do things. You can talk to dead people. You can talk to people telepathically. And, yeah, you can use that for your own benefit, but that makes you feel bad. And you don't feel good about that. So then you do it to help people, and you feel good about that. And then you do more. So it's just a good exercises to help people grow up. And that's why I started teaching people to do paranormal things. I had a whole bunch of courses where what I do is explain what is the paranormal, how does it work, what is the mechanics of it, what should you learn from it, what can you do with it, and where is it going to take you? And I explain all this, and we do all the paranormal things. I do, you know, talking to dead people, talking to people that never been here at all, you know, remote viewing, healing, and so I went through all the various things that you can do that are paranormal. And I'd explain them all and then give them a binaural beat that I created, send them off to their bed, and they'd do the binaural beat. They'd come back, and then I'd be their coach. They'd say, oh, I tried that, but nothing happened. Oh, I fell asleep and nothing happened. And I'll explain to them what the problems are and the issues and what they should do. And then they give them another binaural beat, let them go back. So this was like a 5-day thing, like 10 hours a day. We do this for 5 days. And most everybody did some paranormal stuff. Not under their control, but it would just happen. And people were real happy with that. And then I took all the best of all of those brick and mortar things and made a course in audio for people. So there's the 5-day course in audio. And it was made by taking the best of all the questions that the people had, the best of all the answers that I gave, and go over the whole thing and make the 5-day course out of that. And I put that out at a very low price.
So that's available.
That's available. Yeah, people want to do paranormal things, and I make the binaural beats myself. They, I've been doing this so long that I make a binaural beat, and then I'd see how it worked, and I'd tweak it a little, and see if it worked better or not so good, and then I'd tweak it a little more. And after, 10, 15 years of doing this and tweaking it, I found binaural beats that were actually pretty complex. They got a lot of action going on, and it's not just a continuous binaural beat. And they seem to work really, really well. Oh. So, and I sell those at really inexpensive too. You can buy one for like $15 or something, $10.
All of that's on your website.
It's all on my website.
Which, of course, we're going to link to in the description of this video.
Yeah, and if you get that training course, that for the 5-day course, the binaural beats come with it. So that just comes with it as a part of it. So anyway, yeah, that's a course. So I felt like, I didn't really want to talk up the paranormal. And one of my reasons was I think that the only way that my ideas are going to go into the mainstream if the scientists pick them up. Yeah. And if I was known as an out-of-body guy, the scientists wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole. So I kind of kept that, yeah, it's there, but let's not parade that, because I really need to convince the scientists that this is better science. But then eventually, people kept asking, and I said, well, I tell people that if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. Mm-hmm. Don't believe anything until you've experienced it. And once you've experienced it, that doesn't mean that's the truth. It's just your truth. Mm-hmm. Till new and better data comes along. Yeah. So if I tell people that, then I need to give them a means to experience. Mm-hmm. So then I changed my mind. For the first 5 or 6 years, I didn't offer any kind of out-of-body things. That changed my mind, and I said, okay, I got to give people the basics so that they can do the exploring like I did the exploring, and they will get there in the same path that I took. So I did. Mm-hmm. And I had a bunch of people who just struggled with it because they were so left brain that the left brain always crashed their intuitive party. So then I wrote the book, Tom's Park book. Mm-hmm. And that was for those people, because you don't have to meditate. Yeah. You can do it through imagination. Still need discipline, still needs practice, but it's just easier practice for very left-brain people. And so far, I've had a lot of success with that. A lot of people have gotten progress where they couldn't get progress through the meditation from it all. So all of that's available for people that want to learn. And everybody has the capacity. I mean, it's not like you're born with the capacity to go out of body or something. Everybody can do that. It's just some people have had environments that encourage them to do that, and they've gotten better at it. Mm-hmm. And after that, it's just a matter of exploring. Reality is to be explored. It's not to be learned in a book. It's to be experienced and explored, and that's how you learn.
Perhaps the most important paranormal ability is simply to love and to experience compassion.
Well, the most important thing at all that you can do is just to love, to be love. Now, here's an interesting take on that, and that is that if you have fear is the opposite of love. Mm-hmm. The amount of fear you have actually reduces your capacity to love. Yeah. So if you're very fearful, you maybe only have that much capacity to love. And you may just love right up to the maximum of your capacity, and that's just all you've got. As you get rid of the fear, your capacity to love grows. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that everybody's exactly the same and they all can love in the same way at the same depth. It's not true. But the more you grow on this path, the more capable you are of loving, and the more loving you are. You start to care about people you don't even know. You can emotionally connect with people who are having a problem, and you think of how ways you can help them. Whereas before you just said, not my problem, and you walked on. So becoming love is also becoming joy, becoming happy. It's all goes along in the same path.
Years ago, I interviewed Jerry Jampolsky, who wrote the book, Love is Letting Go of Fear.
Yes. He was right on. Yeah, love is letting go of fear. It's he was a reborn alcoholic. And he did come to the right conclusions. Love is letting go of fear. And basically, that's all you have to do. You don't have to learn how to, love. You have to get rid of the fear. When all the fear's gone, then the ego's gone and the beliefs are gone with it, because they're just based on fear. When the fear's gone, you are love. That's what's left over. So it's your love fundamentally is the fundamental component, but the fear makes that dysfunctional. You get rid of the fear, your love, and your life is good. So paranormal helps you do that because it gives you a bigger picture. And the bigger your picture gets, the easier it is to grow up. It's hard to grow up when your picture's only this big.
Also, the idea that death is not a permanent end, because so many people, their basic ultimate fear is the fear of dying.
Yeah, which is also a fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. They don't know what happens afterwards, so it's scary. But yes, when you take this path, you learn that there's no fear at all around death. Death is just part of the process. Mm-hmm. If you didn't die, you wouldn't be able to learn again. And if you just kept going with one life, like I say, you'd probably hit a plateau and it'd be really difficult for you to go any further than that. So you need to die so that you can start over in a new set of experiences, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to go. No, I've done all that. None of that works. So it's part of the plan. Death isn't a problem at all. It's a wonderful transition where you get to regenerate and regenerate again and again, and you keep learning and growing. So that's the way it works. And the whole thing wouldn't work. This is a logical thing. It's science. And that's one of the arguments that I had with, it wasn't an argument, but disagreements that I have sometimes with science types. If it's not mathematics, it's not science. Mm-hmm. No, mathematics is is about quantity, but there's other things that matter other than quantity. And those other things are really where all your interesting things are in your life. All the important things fall over on the subjective side. Mm-hmm. The objective side, stuff is just there to set the stage. And your life is lived really over on the subjective side. So, you have to put some effort in. You can't grow up just by saying, okay, that sounds good, I'm going to grow up. No, you really have to be it.
Well, letting go of fear seems like a good idea most of the time. On the other hand, it seems that sometimes fear is a good thing. It keeps us out of trouble.
No, I would disagree with that. It always causes us trouble. It doesn't keep us out of trouble. I have heard that a lot of times, this problem with fear. But let's say, let's say your fear, we'll do some obvious kind of fear, not a more abstract one. Let's say you live in the woods and the woods is full of grizzly bears. Okay, and you fear going outside. So you stay inside as much as you can. But Grandma, who lives on the other side of the woods, needs medicine, and she doesn't have any, and she's run out, and she's going to die if she doesn't get those pills. And you have some, but you need to go out of your house to get there. Now, so that's the problem. Now, if you are fearful, your probability of getting all the way to Grandma's house is close to zero, because those bears will smell fear. You will look like bait to them. You will look like lunch because you're afraid. And when you encounter one, instead of doing the right thing to raise your probability of survival, you do all the wrong things. You'll turn and run, which even looks more like prey. Now you smell like prey and you act like prey, and you can't outrun a grizzly bear. So that's the wrong thing to do. So the fear will kill you. Now, if you are not afraid, that doesn't mean you just wander out in the woods anytime and you're not afraid. That's stupid. Of course you don't do that. If you are not afraid, it doesn't mean you're stupid. So what do? You learn about grizzly bears. You learn, does staring them in the eye, is that helpful or is that harmful? Do you carry an air horn? Do they run away with loud noises? Do you puff yourself up and wave your hands? Do you make yourself small to try to hide? What do you do? So you're prepared. You have your air horn. You have your pepper spray. You walk quickly. You don't tarry. You make as little noise as possible, and you practice these things, and you know how to use them. And okay, so now you go. Yeah. Now you still may be eaten by a grizzly bear, but your probability of success is much higher. And if you do see a bear, you will do all the right things to raise your probability of success, not the wrong things. So fear is what gets you in trouble. Preparedness gets you out of trouble. Now, there's the idea that, let's say in our culture, we scare children to try to keep them safe. I can have a lot of examples, but in general, children are an exception. With children, you can't overrun their free will. You can't let a 3-year-old go play in the street because they'll get hurt. So they want to play in the street, you override their free will, you put them in a yard, and you lock the gate. So with children, it's different. Okay, you don't frighten them, though. You don't say, oh, a car's going to run over you and kill you. You just pick them up and say, no, this is not a good place to play. you need to come over here. You try not to frighten them. Because if you frighten them, then you'll create fears that they may carry for the rest of their life. But adults now, when you are an adult, what you need is information, not fear. So you say, all right, like with the bears, you need information about how to deal with it. And then you need to be fearless enough that you can deal with it when it comes. You don't panic and do something stupid. So we tend to use fear. We use fear with religion. You go to hell if you don't do this. And you'll especially go into heaven if you give the church 10% of your income. And that sort of thing. So we use fear to get what we want. And politicians use fear to get what they want. Everybody wants to manipulate people. Marketers use fear to get what they want. If you drink this brand of beer, all the girls will love you, and they show somebody who has the wrong beer and nobody likes them. Then they show the guy with the right beer and all the girls go around him, And it's messages that we take in, and fear is a way you can manipulate things. But in all cases, education is the best antidote to problems, being aware, being prepared, and understanding the way it is. You still might get eaten by a bear, even if you're prepared, but you've raised your probability of success as much as you possibly can, and it's worth that risk to get grandma her pills. Okay, so you can think, what do we do? What do we fear? We frighten young girls. We frighten young girls, and particularly 30 years ago, when there were no contraceptives, we frightened young girls about sexuality because we didn't want them to get pregnant too early. Yeah. So we'd frighten them. We'd tell them terrible stories, and in their heads, sex was an awful thing. So we tried to frighten them with the idea that one day they'd get married and all that fear would just go away. Mm-hmm. Of course, fear doesn't work like that. It just doesn't go away because of some event that takes place. That's part of a person when they have that fear. So rather than that, it would be much better to fill their heads with information. Let them understand consequences. Let them understand what it's all about. Give them information so that they can act wisely. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, they're still children. They can't act wisely. Well, the information you give them has to be sorted to their age. At some time with children, you just lock the door. And other times, you just have to let them go because they're growing into adults, and you'll have to let them make their own choices. Mm-hmm. You give them information. You give them guidance. Fear doesn't work. They'll get into a situation where their instincts take over and their fear recedes. And if they have no information, they're more likely to get into trouble than they are if they do have information. So I don't see that there's ever a situation where fear is positive. Fear is always part of the problem. But the exception is with people who you can overrun their free will, which are children.
Okay, I like the way you've couched that, to think in terms of preparation.
Mm-hmm. Getting ready, understanding, learning. Because I've had people, they say, well, if you're fearless, why don't you jump off a cliff? And I said, well, that's easy, because that would be stupid. Just because I'm fearless doesn't mean I'm stupid. I'm not going to jump off a cliff because I don't want to end my life. So, it's that sort of thing. Well, if you're fearless, you'll be stupid. You'll do anything. And no, you need to be fearless, but you also need to be smart. You need to be aware. You need to understand your environment, understand the people, the critters, the poison plants, and everything around you that's important. You have to know about it. And if you know about it, your probability of success is higher than if you're ignorant of it. So fear is always a part of the problem. It's never part of the solution. It's a false solution.
Well, other than sort of putting your fear aside and acting in spite of your fear, how do you let go of fear?
Well, often, the first thing is you have to really want to. Again, like we said, your intent has to really be there, or your efforts will just never sort of work and you'll get frustrated and quit. So you really have to want to and realize it's not a quick process. Sometimes then, it's better to, what do they say? Fake it until you make it. And that means that you try to act kind. You try to be kind to people. You look for situations where you can help. And then you help. And as you do that, okay, you're acting. You're doing it intellectually because you think this is good. You should do that. Well, if you keep doing that, pretty soon you're helping because you like helping. Because when you help, you feel good. You like helping. You like the smiles, the thank yous, the gratitudes, you see. Feels really good. So then you start to be kind rather than just act kind. So one of the things you can do is fake it until you make it. But when you fake it, you have to fake it with the idea that you want to grow into being it, not just that you're faking it to impress your neighbors. Oh, I see that little old lady. Well, I'll help her across the street, and then I'll tell everybody at work how good I was, and they'll think I'm a good person. That's the wrong reason, and that won't take you there. That faking it is just going to be fake, and it's always going to be faking it. But if you fake it until you make it, you will find that the gratitude you get and the positiveness that comes your way because of it will reinforce it, and pretty soon you're doing it just because you want to. That's at the being level. Why am I kind? Because I like being kind. I want to be kind. I notice people that have issues that I can help them with. And I've learned you don't help people by lecturing them. You don't help people by pointing out where they're wrong. That doesn't help people. That makes people angry. You help people by being there to help them succeed on their own and in their own way. That's how you help people. So you learn that just trial and error because you really want to help people. If you're arrogant, you say, well, look, that person's doing it wrong. I'll show them how to do it right. That generally isn't going to be helpful. Now, sometimes the person will say, oh, thank you. I appreciate that lesson. Most of the time, they won't appreciate the lesson, and they will think that you're an arrogant idiot trying to tell them how to do something.
Right. I didn't ask for your help.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to, so then you begin to be more nuanced about people and what they need, and how can you help them, and how can your help hurt them, and that sort of thing. So it all just starts to grow together. So you get rid of the fear by being helpful, by trying, because that little bit will start feeding other things. And the reason that you're not helpful is because you're too self-centered. I'm not helpful because, okay, that little old lady will get across the street, but somebody else can help her. I'm late for work and I need to get there. Okay, now you're getting to work on time and not being chewed out by the boss is more important than that lady safely getting across the street. Poor choice. That lady's life is more important than you not getting chewed out by your boss. So you help that lady across the street, and when she's safe, you go on to work. And if your boss chews you out, say, well, I would have been here early, but I saw a little old lady that I needed to help. And your boss will say, he's a really nice guy. And you'll actually do better with your boss. You see? So you'll find that when you do the right thing, it pays back. You get, you level up. Your boss likes you better, not worse, because you were late. He understands. So you get rid of the fear most easily just through kindness and caring and trying to be the best person you can be, because you want to be a better person, not because you're trying to impress your friends. So that's the thing. Now, one of the techniques is you can look for your fear. What is my fear? What makes my choices? If I say, no, I don't want to go do that, I don't feel like it. Why do you not want to do it? And it may be just that you're tired, and that's fine. But it may be that you don't want to do that because you might meet a lot of new people and you don't really know those people, and it's a little scary meeting new people. And that's why you don't want to do it. Well, that's a fear. Yeah. So what you do is you say, let's have some courage. Courage is the only antidote for fear. You have to have the courage and say, well, I really don't want to do that because I'm a little uneasy meeting new people and so on, but I'll do it anyway. So you have courage, and then you go. And what you'll find out is you'll have a good time. You didn't think you would, but you'll have a good time. And then that'll give you more courage to do it the next time. So the second thing is courage. Just have the courage to push yourself a little out of your comfort zone in doing the right thing, or in meeting people, being social, being part of of something that's nice with other people, in cooperation with others. You can go volunteer, go hold preemie babies, or go, serve in a soup kitchen someplace. Go down to Salvation Army and sort through old clothes that are coming in the different sizes and stuff. There's lots of places that you can volunteer. And you will find that after doing that for a while, you feel better. And you like doing it. And when you feel better about yourself, you'll do better with everybody else. When you feel angry and unhappy, most of the times because you don't like yourself. You're not happy with the way you are. You're afraid to talk to new people because you're afraid they're not going to like you. They're not going to think you're worthy or you're valuable or they're all smarter than you are or something like that. It's a negative towards self. Most of the fear turns out it's self-negativity. And the way you get over that is courage and just to go do, or just start with kindness because that builds. And then you feel good about yourself. I helped 3 ladies across the street today. Good, I feel good about that. So it makes your whole day happier. You're bouncier, you have more energy because of it. The other way is to say, what is my fear? All right, I don't like meeting new people. Why not? What is it about new people that's frightening you? Well, I think maybe they won't like me. I think they'll be talking about things I don't know anything about and I'll look stupid. And then you realize, well, that's the fear of being inadequate. Why do I have a fear of being inadequate? And then you go back to, well, when did I start feeling really inadequate? When was that a bother? And sometimes you can't tell. It's like the history isn't there and you just don't know. And you have to say, well, I accept that. That's the way I am. I feel inadequate. And that's authentic. That's me. Now, what can I do about it? Well, I can have some courage. I can get out of my zone and, my comfort zone. I can have courage. So that helps you. And sometimes you do find out. You can say, I started feeling inadequate when I was 8 years old. And Mom came home with a teddy bear for my younger brother and a teddy bear for my younger sister, and I didn't get one. Well, it's because you were 8 years old and Mom thought you were past the teddy bear phase. But you didn't see it that way. You saw it as your siblings got gifts and you didn't. And it must be because you're not as good as they were, or not as valuable, or not as well liked. And you started having some sense of not being good enough to get the teddy bear. And they were. And 50 years later, you're still insecure because you didn't get a teddy bear. Now, Mom didn't realize that she was going to create that problem, but things are like that. People have these things that happened to them when they were young, and they jump to the conclusion of being unworthy, and they carry that around all their life. It just blossoms differently. Now they're afraid to go to parties, or they're afraid to do this or that, and it all goes back to being unworthy. But most of the negativity that people have tends to come down to being negative about self, being insecure, being afraid, not being good enough. And you just have to work with that and say, well, why am I not good enough? I do as well as other people in the office. I do this, I do that. I know how to dance, or if I don't, I can learn. I can go to a dance class. And you start to socialize more. And the more you do, the more friends you make, the more invitations you get, and it all just kind of goes. But recognizing it is sometimes a good thing. Other times you can't recognize it. You know that's the way you feel. So that's one way. Another way to go is just to try to be authentic. Say, okay, being authentic is good, but what if I'm authentic and people don't like me anymore? The only reason they like me is because of I compliment them and I suck up to them and so on. And what if I'm just myself? Well, the thing to do is try it and see how it plays. Just do the way you feel, the way you want, and see how it plays. And if you do it, and people don't like you, well, then you maybe need to change. Maybe being yourself, you're arrogant, you're self-centered, and that's just the way you are. Well, accept that and say, it doesn't play very well when I'm myself. I get a lot of negative crap coming my way. Instead of saying, it's all those people, and blame it on them, you have to say, well, I need to change. I shouldn't be that arrogant. I shouldn't tell everybody how to live their life. I need to grow out of that. So at least you now know what it is you need to do. But you wouldn't have known if you hadn't tried it out. So that will show you often your things. Another thing is just learn how to meditate. when you meditate, you get to know yourself up close and personal in that meditation state. And if you got a lot of fear, you'll manifest that fear. You get out of body, you'll manifest that fear. You'll start thinking, and you'll get that empty space in your mind, and pretty soon something will come in that's negative, and that'll start to build. And you say, well, I need to get that away, but you find that negative stuff keeps coming back in your mind, and that's going to tell you something. You're getting acquainted with yourself. That negativity's in you someplace, and you didn't know it, but when you settle your mind down to where it's just you and your mind, if you got negativity in there, it'll start bubbling up, which is why a lot of people start meditating and quit, because they don't like what they find. You run into yourself in a meditation state. So that's helpful. Just meditating will help people grow up, getting in that clear space. So there's lots of ways to approach getting rid of fear, and it depends on your personality, what your fear is, and so on. But recognize you have it. That's a big first step. Recognize you have fear. And, I get these guys who are like 20-something, and I'll tell them the stuff about fear, and they'll say, I don't have any fear. I don't have any fear, and I'm really not egotistical either. As far as I know, I don't have any beliefs. I don't think I have much of an ego. That's not my problem. I don't have that sort of thing. And, I tell them, well, just think about your life in the last week of your life. Did you ever feel negative about something? Did you ever get angry? Did you ever feel, like you weren't, getting what you were due, or any other kind of negative feelings? And they say, oh, yeah. I said, you wouldn't get those feelings without fear. And they go, really? I said, yeah, you need to start looking into your fears. Every time you have a negative feeling, that's because you have a fear. If you had no fear, your life would be just full of joy. And they say, okay. And then I get an email from them, or I run into them like 6 months later, and they said, Tom, I'm full of fear. I don't have anything but fear. My whole life is driven by my fear. And they get to that because once they see it, they start to see that almost all their choices are choices made out of fear. And I say, well, that's a good start. Now you know what you're working with. You got a chance of getting through it. Before you know what you're working with, you're stuck with it. So then they go work on it. And usually 6 months or so later, I hear from them again, and it's, Tom, you changed my life. You say my relationships are better. My wife and I are getting along a whole lot better. My kids and I get along a lot better. I'm better at work. I think straighter. And, they say, life is getting so much better for me. And I say, well, did you get rid of all your fears? And they, oh, no. I just got rid of a little bit of them, but it's making everything better. But it's just typical because young men in particular feel like they are a force into themselves, and they don't feel like they're fearful. They don't feel like they have much ego, or they have any beliefs. And when they really get down to it, they're full of all of that stuff. And that's a big step in the right direction, is just to realize that, why do I make this choice? Why am I negative? Why do I get upset? Why am I even stressed? It's usually because you have fear that things aren't happening the way you want them to happen. That's what your stress is. Things aren't the way you want them to be. Well, should things be the way I want them to be? Should everything be the way I want them to be? I think that's maybe being a little self-centered, that I'm the master of the universe and things should be the way I want them to be. And anyway, it's fun, working with people and talking to people, but getting rid of fear is not a simple, easy, or quick task. But if you are really committed to doing it, you will succeed.
It is incredibly comprehensive. You're very eloquent describing it, and I have to say I'm very impressed.
It's unusual. There's nothing else like it out there. A lot of other people understand virtual reality, yet we live in a virtual reality. The digital physicists all kind of get that. A lot of philosophers are kind of seeing the value in that. A guy from Britain being one of them. But anyway, but they don't get the connection that consciousness is the computer. consciousness is an information system. An information system can configure itself as any kind of information system it wants. It can be a computer if it wants to be a computer. It can be a talking head if it wants to be a talking head. It's an information system. It creates, processes, and is aware. It's a conscious information system. So once you add that, that's the big unknown that everybody misses. But once you get that, everything falls out really, really coherently. And then you get the sense that you really do understand consciousness, its source, where it comes from, how it works. Can you make consciousness? No. Will consciousness inhabit an avatar of some other type? Sure, why not? It just inhabits whatever makes choices that are meaningful.
Well, Tom, we've now done about 10 hours of video conversation regarding many different aspects of your theory. I still have the impression that there's a lot more.
There is. There's a lot more detail, mainly in ferreting out the logical consequences. You know, you have a theory, and we've talked about the basic theory and what the structure is, but there's literally hundreds of logical consequences that fall out of that theory. And until you spend a lot of time thinking about it, you're not aware of those. So there are a lot of things you have to talk about, and mostly it's not going to be the theory anymore. It's going to be maybe refreshing the theory or how the theory applies, but the logical consequences of the theory. How does this theory change your life? What good is this theory to the guy in the street? Usually physics theories aren't very interesting to the general public, but this theory actually will directly affect every human on the planet. It's not just science. It's about life and living and being. It's about finding happiness. You know, happiness is a byproduct of a life well lived. It's not something you can make happen. So there's lots of little logical consequences that we haven't gotten to yet, but they will be fun. We'll get to them.
Well, the good news is that we will have ongoing conversations. Yes. So I consider this 10 hours a good, solid beginning.
Yes, I agree. It's a good, solid beginning. And I'm very appreciative that you have made connection with me, that we are talking, because you represent a community that I have very little visibility in. And that's the community that studies and is concerned with consciousness. So particularly in the academic areas of consciousness. And that's a community that I would like to, the word comes to me, infiltrate, but that's not the right word. But I'd like to share my ideas with them, because I think it would make the things they're pondering, the mysteries that they have, suddenly have logical answers. Things they've been looking for and studying and trying to find that answer. Why does this work? How does that happen? Why does a dead guy get up and, walk to his grave? All these mysteries, and there's an answer for all those mysteries. They follow a set of logic.
That's the incredible breakthrough, because some people feel, and I think I myself have felt for a long time, well, these things will always be mysterious.
Exactly. That's a big hurdle I have to overcome. Particularly with the physicists. They've gotten to the point that nobody will ever know. Nobody can ever know these things. Well,
there is the ineffability of reality itself.
Yeah.
As you point out, we're using metaphors, we're using language, and ultimately, it's experience that matters.
Yes, it's experience. And this experience has a purpose. It's not just random experience. There's a purpose to this experience. So experience is the key. But I have a real hard time with the scientific community, because they will look at the first 10 words and throw it out. And the academic community says that's impossible. Nobody knows how all this stuff works. And saying you have a theory of everything, and you know how the paranormal works, and all this, bullshit. That's not possible. So it's hard to get your toe in the door to explain what you have. And what I've found is, particularly with the physicists, is that if you can actually get them in the door and sit them down and talk to them, by the end, they're on board. They say, I see it, it's better physics. But if you can't get them through that, because, even with yourself, right? You're a very conscious guy, and you're a very open-minded guy, or we wouldn't be here. Just to talk to me, you need to be pretty open-minded. But you come with an idea of what's this all about. It sounds kind of far-reaching. It sounds sort of impossible, but we'll see. Yeah. We'll just be open and see what happens. That kind of open-mindedness is rare. And particularly in an academic community, it tends to be a little...
Well, and rare. Even being open-minded, my sense is I need to listen multiple times.
Yes.
Because it's strange. It needs repetition in order to sink in.
It does. And it's hard to get people to sit still for that much repetition before they walk off and say, I don't get it. No, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But every time I do get people to sit still for it, I almost always find at the end, after they've thought it through, after they've experienced it, and they think about what are all the things that this answers, they generally come aboard. They're going to think, this is an actual logical solution. But it's just such a big paradigm shift. The paradigm shift from physical reality, from materialism to the idea that this is a virtual reality, right? This is a computer game. Oh, come on, give me a break. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard. This solid stuff is, but once you think about it and understand it, then suddenly it's simple. And you start seeing everything and it falls right into place. Oh, I see how that works. I see how dead people get up. I see how flying saucers land in somebody's backyard and they have a conversation with them and they leave a trinket or something. It's just a data stream. Why? Why would a conscious system do that? Because it opens people's minds, makes them think that there's something more to reality. There's another dimension. There's more things. Why does it give people paranormal experiences? Why do people just spontaneously have an out-of-body like Bob Monroe? Because he'll write a book about it, and then another 100,000 people will be introduced to this paradigm. Why did these strange things happen, and why is the paranormal there? And we can measure it, we can see that it's real, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Dean Radin will get in his lab and he'll say people react to the next picture that's going to come up before the random generators even pick the picture. How is that possible? So everything seems to be impossible, and then you give up and nobody will ever know. And it's really difficult to penetrate with a theory that starts off with, this is a virtual reality and we're computed, because that's such a big paradigm shift. Yeah. But once you do see it, you see that it really simplifies everything. It's very simple, it's very elegant, and its reach is very broad.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for being available and generously giving me so many hours one-on-one with your time. I'm delighted to know I'll be able to share it with thousands of our viewers, and you will be welcome back on New Thinking Aloud anytime.
Yeah, well, this is pretty radical new thinking.
Yeah.
Very radical new thinking, but once you wrap your mind around it, it's impressive. And I didn't intend to be impressive at all. And I don't feel impressive. I feel very happy that I blundered into these concepts. My life just fell into place the way it should. I was in graduate school. I could have stayed that extra year and gotten that PhD, but no, I had to go meet Bob Monroe. And I had to land in that job with the guy who had his book. I didn't even know Bob Monroe existed, and I probably never would have. And then I went out there with the group, and everything just fell into place. And now I can look back at it, and I can understand exactly why I had to do the things I did. It was all part of a plan to help us turn this corner now that we have the tools to take a big step forward that we never had before.
Well, I'm grateful that you went through all of those experiences and are able to share it now. And for those of you watching or listening, I want to thank you for being with us and sticking through this lengthy interview, because you are the reason that we are here.
Absolutely. Knowledge is great, Shared knowledge is much better.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.